Ladies and gentlemen, the CSU AgInnovation Summit 2.0 is about to begin. Please take your seats and kindly silence your cell phones.
Chasing stars, and you're always gonna fly away just because you know you can. Never gonna learn there's no such place as a Neverland. You don't understand, you'll never grow up. You're never gonna be a man. You're never gonna grow up. Yeah, you're never gonna be a man. Peter Pan. Never gonna be a man. Usually a drink will do the trick. Take the edge off quick, sitting in the dark with a shared cigarette. Seeing eye to eye and heart to heart. But maybe I'm just getting old. Used to work, but now it don't. A long gone dry. You know the kind where you take a turn and you don't know why. But it clears your mind, a surefire cure. I need something strong. That'll last a little longer. I could use a love song that takes me back just like that when it comes on to a time when I wouldn't roll my eyes at a guy and a girl who make it work in a world that for me so far just seems to go so wrong. Yeah, I could use a love song. I wish I didn't know so much. I peeked behind the curtain now. That magic rush feels like a trick that isn't working, but I haven't lost all hope. Yeah, it's hurting, but it ain't dead. I could use a love song that takes me back just like that when it comes on to a time when I would
Ladies and gentlemen, the CSU Ag Innovation Summit 2.0 is about to begin. Please take your seats.
Cause you showed up and all eyes on you, shining like a diamond in a neon room. Every guy here wants to make a move, I better make a move. 'Cause somebody else will if I don't. Walk up and ask you your name right now. Offer to buy you a drink, sit down, they tell you looks good, kill. Somebody else will if I don't. Take a chance on your lips and lean in, slowly stealing your kiss like this, making your world stand still. Somebody else will. Somebody else will. Maybe you're a little bit West Coast, maybe you're a little bit down home. Either way, girl, I just gotta know. I just gotta know. Somebody else will if I don't. Walk up and ask you your name right now. Offer to buy you a drink, sit down, they tell you looks good, kill. Somebody else will if I don't. Take a chance on your lips and lean in, slowly stealing your kiss like this, making your world stand still. Somebody else is gonna hold you, somebody gonna get to know you. If I don't get fair and sweet, you off your feet, girl. Somebody else will. Somebody else will. Somebody else will if I don't. Walk up and ask you your name right now. Offer to buy you a drink, sit down, they tell you looks good, kill. Somebody else will if I don't. Take a chance on your lips and lean in, slowly stealing your kiss like this, making your world stand still. Somebody else will, baby. Oh, somebody else will. Yeah, somebody else will. Somebody else will. Baby, don't say no so quick. This ain't about me trying to see how far that I can get. But I ain't gonna lie, I wouldn't mind just a little bit of you and I, eye to eye, lips on lips, swaying to the music real close. We can both use a little let go kind of night. Baby, if you want a good time, we can get on it. Let's take a shot and you can sip on it. We'll find a floor, we can dance on it. Slow song it, far as I can tell, that thing ain't got no rain on it. So come on, baby, bring on it. It's one of those stars falling, love calling. But get you feeling alright now. Sounds good, don't it? Don't it? Every little thing you got to know that I want it. Want it. Sounds pretty good, don't it?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Executive Associate Dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences, Dr. James Pritchett.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the CSU Ag Innovation Summit in 2017. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, and I'll be honest, I was a little shocked. I've never had the voice from above speak to me in quite the way it has today. But you know, it's that kind of inspiration, those kinds of ideas that are really going to draw us together as we talk about agricultural innovation and really seek to create a community and catalyze a conversation about where we can go, the investments that we can make, the resources that might be available to us to really drive change as it's needed and as is the opportunity for agriculture. So thank you for joining us today. Joining us during a very important week on the Colorado State University campus. This is Ag Week, which takes a nod, if you look out over on the foothills there, to that A that sits on the hill that reminds us of that great agricultural heritage and the land-grant university mission that we have here. You know, innovation's been part of agriculture since that very beginning back in 1870. And the idea that we can move forward, that we can gather knowledge, that we can generate new ideas from questions that folks have, that our stakeholders have, just like you. The idea that we can take that, we can translate that, and we can set the stage for the next generation is one that we hold very dear. This week during Ag Week, we welcomed our students back on Tuesday, brought some of our brightest minds together. You're going to get a chance to see them, some of our very best students, whether that be Brittany or Rachel, or whether that be Wilson, who will be up with us. Hey, Wilson, good to have you here. Introducing some of our guests and spending some time as MCs within our sessions. So a very important part of what we do. We'll have the Ag Innovation Summit the next 2 days, and then on Friday, we'll have a chance to be able to recognize some of our very best leaders in the industry of agriculture, whether that be at our fall gather, our livestock leader, or our distinguished alumni for the Department of Soil and Crop Sciences. And then Saturday, of course, is the best barbecue you can get in any college football game. That's Ag Day that we'll have on Saturday right outside of the Laurie Student Center here, and then we'll go over to the football game. So a week that really celebrates agriculture, some of the best that we have, and some of our knowledge. I really appreciate you joining us today so that we might be able to engage in a conversation that will help to take us forward thinking about agriculture innovation. Some important folks with us today. All of the individuals here that work in industry are innovators and work in business, are scientists like Howard Shapiro is here with us today. Folks that are great thought leaders among their commodity organizations like Bill Hamrick is here. And I just want to make sure that we recognize the godfather of Colorado. Well, Don Brown, I don't know if you mind if I call you the godfather of Colorado agriculture. Don Brown is with us today. He's the ag commissioner as well, working within that agency structure. You know, I think it's a little bit tough to drive policy in this country these days, but we seem to find a lot of agreement around agriculture, and we have representatives from Senator Gardner's office, Senator Bennett's office, and from Congressman Buck's office. So thank you for joining us as well. It takes a lot of individuals, though, to drive this conversation and catalyze it, and we have some terrific sponsors who've helped us. You'll be able to see those sponsors on the screen. Colorado Livestock Association, Bill Hamrick here, representing the Colorado Livestock Association. Thank you for stepping forward early in this ag innovation process with your support behind what we're doing. I very much appreciate that. Also get great support from the Vice President for Research's office, Alan Rudolph is here. You'll see him a little bit today as they step forward and really talk about the generation of knowledge and the great innovations that are taking place. Vice President of Engagement, who heads up Extension, as well as our CSU Water Center. They've been part of the sponsorship as well. Cathay Reynolds is here. And I was like, Cathay, there you are. Thank you for supporting this as well. And of course, the Colorado State University College of Agricultural Sciences is one of the key sponsors for this event. So, convening this conversation, bringing us all together, we have a terrific program in mind, but truthfully, it's your ideas that are going to move us forward. So I need to ask a favor of you. I need for you to think about the conversations you'd like to have, the ideas that you have over this next day and a half, so we can pull those together and take our next steps forward. We want you to engage in lots of conversations in this space, and we've thought about some unique ways that we might be able to represent that. In fact, if you just look to my right, Karina Branson is over there. Karina is really a graphical recorder who will take some of our very best ideas and record those for us on those 4x8 sheets. She'll be working as we go along today and throughout the day, taking those ideas and transcribing them for us, and we'll refer back to those throughout our summit. Karina is particularly interested in hearing folks talk about the ag innovation ecosystem. So when you think about an ecosystem, it's all those important bodies, those important organisms, those important ideas, and how they interact with each other and those relationships. She'd like to find out where you fit in that ag innovation ecosystem. So as you have a break today or you get the chance, please walk over to Karina and chat with her a little bit about what the ag innovation ecosystem means to you. I think that's a way for us to pull together our narrative. You know, our narrative will come from some of those great ideas. You'll have questions from some outstanding speakers that we'll have today. You might want to take a few moments and jot those questions down on these index cards so that we might be able to share them. We'll have folks that will walk around, pick up these index cards, and we'll route those up to the stage for each of your speakers. So a little bit on the logistics of how we can communicate in that sense. A bit about logistics, too. Everything is going to be in this room in the Laurie Student Center during the day until we take a nice little walk over to CSU's brand new football stadium. We'll get the chance to be over there for our roundtable event this night. So we'll have some folks that will be able to lead you right over and do that. And just so that we have the chance to stay on time, let me see where I've, you know, this is a College of Agriculture that's sponsoring this. When you hear the cowbell, what does that make you think of? Yeah, that's right. You know what it reminds me of, this cowbell, is that lead cow that lead cow leading us to the greener pasture, to the next idea and the places that we'll go. So we'll use the cowbell to signal that we're about to start and we want to reconvene again. So if you hear the cowbell, that'll be part of the logistics that we'll cover and that we'll have for us. For those of you not oriented to this beautiful room in the Laurie Student Center and this beautiful student center that we have, if you'd like to use the facilities, if you go out the exit, down to my left, and then in either direction are restrooms and facilities that you can make use of. We're really looking forward to having you here as we generate those ideas, those moments, and be able to move things forward. So on behalf of Colorado State University, our 33,000 students, all of our faculty and staff, welcome, welcome, welcome. I look forward to working with you. One thing that I think is important is that we have aha moments, those moments of inspiration. And I'm about to introduce someone whose career has been built around that idea, that there's epiphanies that you can create, either by when you lecture, because he's a distinguished professor of marketing, or by when you lead teams. In fact, he was the dean of the College of Business for 14 years, where he put together teams that created aha moments and epiphanies for the students, for the staff, and the faculty. Or whether that's for the entire state of Colorado. You know, it was Governor Hickenlooper who recognized that ability to generate those aha moments and those epiphanies when he made him the very first Chief Innovation Officer and created that Colorado Office of the Innovation Network. He's now our Dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences and the Director of our Ag Experiment Station. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dean Ajay Menon to kick off our session.
Good morning. It's more coffee out there, so if you need to wake up. First things, there is a lesson here for me. I should coordinate the speech a bit better with James Pritchard, because a lot of what I was going to talk about, he seems to have covered. And we should have also coordinated so this aha moment that he talks about could have been deleted from his presentation as well. Right? I've been at Colorado State University for 27 years. Came here for a 2-year stint in 1991. I have never seen that A as pretty as she sits. It has never given me context in a manner that it gives me today at this moment. It brings Colorado State University and this event all together in a real nice nutshell. She reminds us as to why Colorado State University was established. And I'm not in the speech. I was sitting there looking at that A, and I'm going, how pretty that A is on this day. So, but back to my remarks here. You know, usually you begin your thanks at the end, or you say your thanks at the end of the speech. But I think what happens, we rush through our thank yous often. Let me begin by acknowledging 3 individuals who are responsible for this event. Paula Mills, you have heard, you have received emails from her often. Where's Paula? Paula's outside, maybe? Paula's standing in the back there. We brought her from the Office of Engagement, and she really has been the guiding point for this whole conversation that's going to unfold here. Malia Michaels, Malia is out here. And Malia, again, a student of mine back in the business school, brought her here, and she's working with us. I did want to acknowledge the 2 of them, especially for what they have done in the last 6 months. Because up until about 6 or 7 months, we weren't sure we were going to do this summit. And I said, no, we're going to do it. They said, we got only 6 months. I said, no, we're going to do it. And these guys pulled it off. So I just want to say thank you all. And of course, the cheerleader in a suit, James Pritchard. James has really been the force guiding these folks. So now, back in 2013, there was an article in the Atlantic Monthly. And Atlantic Monthly assembled a group of historians, venture capitalists, and scientists to identify the greatest innovations since the wheel, which they basically pitched at the year 6000 AD. And it was easy for us all to see that agriculture, and innovation has had a long-term love affair. Going back to history, some of the earliest innovations of our times are rooted in agriculture. Whether we are talking about the cotton gin, or the thresher and the binder, to the tractor, not to forget the refrigerator, or nitrogen fixation that helped with fertilizers, the Green Revolution, and more recently, if you were to look at, not part of the top 50, they had the rubber tires, the GPS, CAT scan, which was designed for medical research being used for food safety these days, that same technology, plant breeding, drones, CRISPR-Cas, all shaping the way in which food and agriculture is produced in this country. Okay. And so as you reflect through all of these innovative breakthroughs, you will note that when you try to define innovation, by the way, innovation, you ask experts to define innovation, you will not get two experts to define innovation the same way. But you start looking at the thread of the definitions, you will realize that innovation is about creating something new. Innovation is really about responding to change in a creative way. Innovation is the creation of the new or the rearranging of the old in a new way. It is about fresh thinking that creates value. In parallel, agriculture has been central to our nation's history. Look at the westward migration that took place back in the 1700s and early 1800s. You will see that it was rooted in the need for more fertile land, for better soil, so that people can feed the growing populace. That's where it first started, when you start looking at it. So agriculture is also part of our nation's history, but it's also part of the geopolitics of our times. Food and famine and feeding people have been the source for political stability and also the source for global power in a loose way. So as we continue that tradition, so we continue that tradition here at Colorado State University with our focus on innovation and agriculture. In our college, with a vision for unquestioned global preeminence in agri-tech and agrobiome as it impacts the security and the sustainability of our food system to enhance the well-being of our animals, plant, and human ecosystem, we are beginning in the college to align our human talent and our financial resources to address the key scientific breakthroughs that is needed in this space. And it's also important to note we are focused on training the next generation of workforce that is demanded from industry. So this summit is part of that critical strategy for us. The goal here is to convene and connect interesting and important people so that we can make commitments to work alongside each other to build Colorado as the hub for innovation in agriculture. Addressing any key challenges of our time as we do, whether it be safety, the security, or the sustainability of our food system, requires the government, the civic society, and corporations to come together. In all of the big challenges or the grand challenges of our times, you need what was termed at one point the golden triangle to come together to address this. It cannot be done by any one entity. So this summit aims to bring key voices from these three major sectors. From the former Secretary of Agriculture, to the chairman and CEO of ADM, to creative entrepreneurs, scientific minds of our times, civic leaders, leaders from the National Western Stock Show, those from the world of startups and the capital markets. It is my hope that Colorado and Colorado State will continue our commitment to lead the way to find path-bending solutions to the challenges to feeding a growing population against a backdrop of natural constraints and, sadly, a more dangerous world. I do seek one commitment from you. The commitment I seek, and almost as a pledge that I seek from you, is that you are engaged in the conversation. Right? I want you to help me build alliances for this partnership to address the grand challenges of our times. I want you to allow us to hear all voices that shape the dialogue and help us all grow in our thinking and approach to innovation. So with that, I welcome you. I hope you enjoy the next day and a half, and I look forward to your active participation. Thank you all for coming. Let's have a great summit.
Good morning. My name is Brittany Boggs, and I'm a senior studying agricultural business and economics here at CSU. It is my pleasure and privilege today to introduce Secretary Tom Vilsack. As President and CEO of U.S. Dairy Export Council, Vilsack provides strategic leadership and oversight of the Council's global promotional and research activities, regulatory affairs, and trade policy initiatives. This includes working with industry leaders to develop a long-term vision and growth in customer trade and trust in the U.S. dairy. Vilsack took on his president role in January of 2017. After serving 8 years as the nation's 30th Secretary of Agriculture, as leader of the USDA, he worked hard to strengthen the American agricultural economy, build vibrant rural communities, and create new markets for the tremendous innovation of rural America. Vilsack was the longest-serving member of President Obama's original cabinet. Prior to his appointment, he served 2 terms as the governor of Iowa in the Iowa State Senate and as the mayor of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. He received his bachelor's degree from Hamilton College and his law degree from Albany Law School in New York. He is also the recipient of 10 honorary doctorate degrees. A native of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Vilsack was born into an orphanage and adopted in 1951. After graduating from law school, he moved to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, his wife Christie's hometown, where he practiced law for 25 years. Vilsack remains currently licensed to practice law in Iowa. The Vilsacks have 2 adult sons, 2 daughters-in-laws, and 4 grandchildren, Jake, Ella, Caroline, and Kason. Please welcome Secretary Vilsack.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brittany, thank you very, very much for that kind introduction, and it's great to be back on campus. I'm looking forward to the ball game Saturday. I just have the expectation that with this new stadium, we score 58 points every game. We'll need to bank a few of those points when we play Alabama in a few weeks, but I'm looking forward to it. Pleased to be here today as well with my wife, Christy. She and I are both working with Colorado State University on the National Western Center project, and we're excited to be here. Excited to be part of an incredible opportunity for the university and for the state and for agriculture generally, to celebrate the incredible heritage that you have here in agriculture. I also would like to point out that we're blessed with the presence of Commissioner Don Brown. I don't know where Don is, but it's right there. He's doing a great job for Governor Hickenlooper and for the farmers and ranchers of this state. Don and I have become friends over the last couple of years. And I'll tell you, he's a guy who is keenly interested in agriculture and in rural development, and I consider him a friend. I'm glad he's here today. Before I arrived here this morning, I was going to give one speech. And then I talked briefly to the dean, and I realized I needed to actually give two speeches. So you're going to get two speeches for the price of one. I'm going to try to condense this so that I don't take all the time. And any topic that I don't discuss in my remarks, I hope that we have a robust opportunity for Q&A afterwards. Let me start by talking about the importance of rural America. When I used to give speeches as Secretary of Agriculture, I would point out to audiences, particularly non-rural audiences, that the country owes a great debt of gratitude to people in rural America. I mean, think about it. It's the place where most of the food that we eat is produced. It is the place where a good deal of the water that we consume is impacted and affected by what happens on the land in our forested areas. It provides the feedstock for most of the energy that we utilize every single day when we turn on the lights and flip on our computers. And it also provides a disproportionate number of people to our military. 15% of America's population usually contributes somewhere between 30 and 40% of our military. It is a place where a sense of community is still rooted and still appreciated and still valued. It's an important place. But it has been for many, many years a place that has not received the attention at every level of government that it needed. It is a place where there were some serious transitions taking place, and those transitions were impacting and affecting communities. So when I became secretary, one of the things that I tried to focus on was to create a new economy in rural areas. You see, for many, many years, our economy in rural America has been primarily what I refer to as an economy that essentially takes from the land. It's an extraction economy. Whether you're in the energy industry or the agricultural industry, something is extracted from the land in rural places and then sent someplace else where value is added, jobs are created, and opportunity exists. And I think what we have failed to do as we became more efficient in agriculture, as we needed fewer and fewer farmers, we failed to make the transition from an extraction economy to a sustainable one. And to give you a sense of this, the magnitude of it, I was born in 1950. In 1950, America had 25 million farmers. I have a population that was roughly 125, 130, 140 million people, somewhere in that neighborhood. It was a fairly significant percentage, and most of the people that were not farmers were probably one or two generations removed from a farm. They had family members still farming. Today, using the most liberal definition of farming, that is anyone who produces more than $1,000 worth of value, we have a little over 2 million farmers. And if you really focus on the people that are traditionally considered family farmers and ranchers as you would define them, you're probably talking about 1 million people. And if you really focused on the folks who produce most of what we consume and use in this country, roughly 85% of all the food and crops and livestock that's raised and produced is done by 250,000 operations. So we've gone from 25 million to 2 million to 1 million to about 250,000. And that's in a population of 320 million people. So as this transition was taking place, no one thought about, well, what do we do with these folks who used to farm, would like to farm, will no longer be able to farm? What do we do to enable them to have the opportunity to stay or come back to rural America? How do we make sure that we have adequate populations in those rural centers so that we can continue to have people that feel duty and responsibility to their country and to serve their country? I think we need a new economy. And that new economy, I think, has essentially 4 pillars, all of which involve innovation. The first pillar is the traditional pillar, which is production agriculture. When I say production agriculture, I'm thinking of commercial-sized operations. And the reality is that American farm families who are in the commercial farming business are incredibly good at what they do. They have become incredibly productive. I use the example from dairy. A dairy cow, when I was born in 1950, produced 5,500 pounds of milk. Today, according to USDA, that same critter is producing anywhere from 22 to 26,000 pounds of milk. And I often say in most audiences, there's a poor cow in Wisconsin that last year produced 70,000 pounds of milk. It's just incredible productivity. And the reality is we can't consume it all here. So exports become incredibly important to the future of rural America. We have to continue to export. We have to continue to look for market opportunities, and that means we have to embrace trade. Fair trade, free trade, however you want to characterize it, but trade is important to agriculture. It's important for us to have trade with Mexico. It's important for us to have trade with Canada. It's important for us to have trade in Asian countries. So production, agriculture, and exports, one incredibly important pillar, and by the way, that also supports nearly 1 million jobs off the farm. So it's a job supporter and job creator. But you can't just rely on production agriculture. There has to be more. There are some people who don't necessarily want to be a commercial-sized operation. There are some people who would prefer to have their farms be small. There's some folks who would love to be able to compete and be competitive in a market that doesn't solely reward size and technology. That means that you have to create alternative markets. For a small operator to compete in a commodity-based market system, it's very difficult. When you are basically having to take the price that's fixed by somebody in Chicago based on a world or global market, it's really hard to compete if you remain small. Very difficult. So you have to look for a value-added opportunity. You have to look for another market opportunity that's not necessarily controlled by that global marketing system. And that means that you have to be able to negotiate directly with the people purchasing whatever it is you're raising or selling or producing. That means you need a local or regional market. That means you need to have the ability to go to your local school, to go to an institution like Colorado State, and be able to negotiate directly. So the second pillar in this revised and redesigned rural economy is local and regional food systems that allow people to be small enough to be able to negotiate directly with their customer, whether it's a farmer's market or whether it's selling to an institutional purchaser like Colorado State. That opportunity is an opportunity for entrepreneurship and for innovation, and for those who want to remain small to remain small. And by the way, it also allows for job creation. Every time you aggregate locally produced food into a food hub, you're helping to support roughly 20 jobs. We've seen an increase, several hundred food hubs now exist in the country today, and on average they employ 20 people. 20 good paying jobs, mostly located in rural areas. Second pillar, production, agriculture, and exports, local and regional food systems. Third pillar, conservation. And the reality is conservation opens up enormous opportunities. You understand that in Colorado. It opens up not just more productive soil, not just preservation of precious water, which by the way, obviously Colorado needs to be deeply concerned about. According to your Colorado Water Plan, you have got to save, figure out how to reuse, conserve 1 million acres of water in the next 15 to 20 years, or you're going to have a very difficult choice here in Colorado. You're going to have to choose whether you want expanding cities or whether you want to maintain your agricultural economy, because you may not have water for both. 1 million acre feet of water, just so you know, I didn't know what that was. It sounded like a lot of water to me. It's a little over 325 billion gallons. So innovation is going to be critically important to preserving and conserving the water resources that allow you to have growing cities and a productive agricultural economy. That means you have to invest in conservation. When you invest in conservation and you improve the soil and you improve the water, you're also going to continue to expand habitat, which means that you're going to have more hunting, fishing, biking, and hiking opportunities and skiing opportunities in a state like Colorado. So it allows you the opportunity to expand recreation, which, by the way, is a multi-$100 billion industry in this country today, employing 6 million people. But it's difficult. If I ask Don Brown, the farmer, not Don Brown, the commissioner, but Don Brown, the farmer, to spend his money, his hard-earned dollars on conservation, he has to make a business decision. He has to figure out whether or not there is sufficient resources for him to do that and still be able to maintain his operation and support his family. See, with farmers, there's no off-ramp. There's no way of shifting the cost or responsibility of conservation onto somebody else like in a business. You know, if a business gets regulated, a business gets told to do something that for environmental purposes, then a cost is associated with it, they can figure out maybe be more efficient in their operation, or maybe they figure out how to increase the cost and price of whatever it is they're selling, and they pass it off to the consumer. farmer has no place to pass it off, especially if he's focused on a commodity-based market where the price is not fluctuating due to what your costs are. It's fluctuating based on supply and demand. So Don got to figure out, does this work? Now, the way Don can make it work is if we incent Don, if we provide partnerships with Don, and we do that obviously through the federal government and the conservation programs that we have, but they're constrained, fiscally constrained. So the question is, how do we figure out a way to have corporations, businesses, interested individuals who are interested in conservation, nonprofit organizations, be willing to invest with Don, partner with Don for conservation? The third pillar of this revitalized rural economy involves the establishment of ecosystem markets. The ability to quantify, verify, certify, measure a conservation result would allow me to market that result to someone who needs that result to satisfy a regulation or to satisfy corporate responsibility requirements. Coca-Cola is an example. Coca-Cola has decided as a company that they want to reclaim all the water that they use in producing their products, which is a tremendous amount of water globally. To do that, they are now investing in conservation to be able to save liters of water so they can basically say, as they can today in the US, that every liter of water they use in products produced in the US is in some way, shape, or form reclaimed through their conservation investments. Because you can measure, quantify, and verify a conservation result, you can sell it, you can market it, you can create ecosystem markets. There are literally hundreds of these small markets, but we need to expand them significantly, and we need to figure out policies that will allow that type of financial innovation to take place. Production agriculture, local and regional food systems, conservation, ecosystem markets, and recreation. Final piece, bringing manufacturing back to rural areas. You do that by embracing a plant-based manufacturing strategy. The ability to basically produce every material, fabric, and fiber imaginable, every energy source, every fuel source from what we grow and what we raise, and what we don't use in the production process. You know, my favorite was, until I got in the dairy business, my favorite was what we're doing with woody biomass. Basically now a new construction material called cross-laminated timber is allowing multi-story buildings to be built solely from wood. There's a 12-story building being built in Portland. It's going to be a prototype for new construction in cities, all wood. Tremendously architecturally innovative, more fire retardant and resistant than even steel and cement, believe it or not, and can support 10, 20, and as many as 30-story buildings made solely from wood. An opportunity to take a lot of the diseased wood that we worry about, that we're currently dealing with as you look out this beautiful vista, which is not as clear as it usually is, because there are fires taking place, and there are fires taking place in part because we got diseased wood that can't be removed because we don't have a market for it. Now there's a market for it. That was my favorite, but now, being in the dairy business, I really like the idea of being able to convert manure from dairy operations into a multitude of chemicals and materials, fabrics, and fibers. And there's a company called Nutrient that's in the process of doing this new innovative science that's going to allow us to take what can be a serious issue on the farm and in rural communities and convert it into a profitable business. To do all of that, though, you need to have consensus. By the way, that's the end of the first speech. So I think I've checked the box on the innovation, but my second speech is really the speech that I came here to deliver. And it's primarily aimed at the students who are in the audience and who may be listening today. I'm deeply concerned about my country, our country. I'm deeply concerned about the divisions that are taking place in our country today. The inability to have dialogue, the inability to have consensus. And this all came to head recently when I read the remarks of Secretary of Defense Mathis. He was recently visiting with some of his troops, and this is what he said. He said, quote, "The only way this great big experiment you and I call America is gonna survive is if we've got tough hombres like you." He's talking to soldiers. "It's got problems. You and I know it. His admonition to these military kids was, you just hold the line until our country gets back to understanding and respecting each other and showing it how to be friendly to one another. So Secretary Matz's solution to the division that takes place is for the military to basically hold the line. And I certainly think they have an incredible responsibility and they do an incredible job. And I have nothing but the highest level of support and admiration for those serving our country. I happen to have been Commander-in-Chief of the National Guard for 8 years in Iowa, and I really know what those people do for us. But I'm going to suggest to you today that there is another group of people who need to be engaged in this effort to bring our country together, because none of what I just talked about in terms of a extraction economy being converted to a sustainable economy, none of that happens unless we can reach consensus on the policies and the procedures and the investments that are going to be required. So the question is, who will get our country back on track? Who will rediscover the way to a community of shared interests? How can we do it? What issue or set of issues could we galvanize around to be able to start the process of reconnecting with one another and showing folks how it can get done? Knowing full well that there may be strong resistance to this in a country that is divided as we are today. Well, I got my start in public life in my small town of Mount Pleasant because I had a belief in community. And I had a specific belief in the young people in my community. As Christy knows, as a lifetime resident of Mount Pleasant, schools were important. The athletic facilities for our kids were important, but for whatever reason, the Mount Pleasant School District could not figure out a way to convince voters to increase their taxes to be able to support a new athletic facility for our kids. They were perfectly content with our football players going into showers that had very cold water, turned to very scalding hot water, back to warm water, back to cold water. They were content with that. And I came home at age 26, a new resident of Mount Pleasant, a new resident of Iowa, a new resident of a small town, and I said, I'm going to go raise the money to fix this problem. Christy looked at me and she said, you know, there are 3 rules of success here. 1, you have to have been born here. 2, you got to be a Methodist. And 3, you have to be a Republican. You're from Pennsylvania, you're a Catholic, and you're a Democrat. Good luck. But I believed in young people because young people don't know enough to know they can't do something. And so I believe that the college students of this country are precisely the audience, precisely the group that can be galvanized and inspired to begin the process of healing, to show us the way, to rediscover a sense of community. I believe that because I've seen college students in the past motivate a country to embrace civil rights, motivate a country to stop an unpopular war, and motivate a country to focus on income inequality. So I know that college students, young people, have the power to do this. I know they have the power to educate, they have the power to organize, they have the power to collaborate, they have the power to advocate. The question is around what issue? What set of issues could we begin the process of figuring out to rediscovering how we do this? Because we have done it as a country throughout most of our history. Well, let me suggest to you that food and agriculture represent the area where I think there is potential for this. Now think about it in your own personal circumstance, the powerful force that food is in bringing people together. Virtually every family celebration or sorrowful event has at its core food. You know, in just a couple of months, we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving. I mean, if you think about Thanksgiving, what do you think about? You think about football, you think about families, you think about food. It brings people together. You think about agriculture and the agricultural community, and you know there's a strong sense of community You know if there's a farmer or rancher down the road that has a disaster, a barn burns down, or cancer strikes and they can't put a crop in the ground, you know what neighbors do. You've seen it. They respond. They rebuild the barn. They plant the crop. So what kind of set of issues could we potentially educate, organize, collaborate, and advocate around? One issue would be food access. I don't think this is a right or left issue. I don't think it's a Democrat or Republican issue. I don't think it's a conservative or progressive issue. I think everybody in this room, regardless of your political persuasion, regardless of how you would characterize yourself, would find it unacceptable that 23 million of our people in this great country of ours do not have access to a decent grocery store. They cannot go shopping the way most of us shop. Surely we can do something about that. And you want to talk about acting locally and impacting global? There's a good place to start. There are communities, I suspect, in this very state. There are rural communities in this state. There are urban areas of this state where there is not access to a decent grocery store. Why can't we begin the process of figuring out creatively the policies, the investments, the ways in which we can encourage the private sector to meet that need? You don't have to be a conservative or a progressive person to know that it's unfair to people if they don't have access to decent food. And we'll all benefit from it, because if you have access to decent food, you're going to have lower healthcare costs in those areas. You got lower healthcare costs, you're going to have healthier people. You have healthier people, you probably got kids who are doing a little better in school. You have kids doing a little better in school. There's probably not as much mischief as there might otherwise be. We all benefit from this. There can be public-private partnerships that college students, and many of these college students who are coming to this campus and other campuses today sadly come from families that are food insecure, and they are themselves food insecure. There's an access issue even on this campus, I suspect. Surely a progressive kid down the hall can get together with a conservative kid down the hall and say, let's work together to figure this out on campus, in this community, in this state. Well, what about food waste? How about the fact that nearly a third of the food that's produced in this country and globally is wasted? Here it's wasted because we don't consume it. In many developing countries, it's wasted because it never gets to the plate. Surely we can do something here, locally, as a community, not right, left, progressive, conservative, Democrat, Republican. Everybody should be for the fact of reducing food waste, because we can add $1,500 a year to everybody's annual income by avoiding the food that's wasted. My guess is we could probably, even as good a job as we're doing here at CSU, there's probably other things that should be done and could be done to reduce food waste, reducing the cost of food, reducing the cost and expense that the college and university assumes, and maybe that will have an impact on everything from tuition to faculty salaries. The issue of responsible marketing. You know, I think the young people of this country can begin demanding more of us when we market our products to them and to all of us. You know, I'm using an example from dairy because I know it. But it's not exclusive to dairy. It's across the board in food issues. Food and the food industry is a tough business. Very small margins, very competitive. People constantly looking for an edge. And I'm all for technology. I'm all for the variety of opportunities that exist today with food being delivered to folks, with some of the new ready-to-cook meals that are being delivered. All of that's great. But what isn't great is when you try to get that market opportunity, that market advantage, by disparaging the product generally and essentially elevating your product. And I'll give you an example. There are companies today that produce milk that are advertising on their carton that their milk doesn't contain any antibiotics. And that would, you know, I'm a consumer. I'm walking down the line. I see company A no antibiotics. Company B doesn't have that on the label. What do you think Company A wants you to assume about the product that's next to it? If I'm labeling it, I don't have antibiotics, and he's not labeling it, doesn't it at least raise the suggestion? Maybe there's antibiotics in that milk? The reality is there are no antibiotics in milk. If a cow gets treated and milk is obtained from that cow, that milk is segregated and dumped. That's just fact. So maybe this generation of Americans can say, look, we don't want to be misled. We don't want to create an aspersion. I'll give you another example. There's a cheese company from Denmark that they decided to come into the US market. And they decided they were going to distinguish their product based on the fact that their cheese doesn't have any RBST in it. Okay, but here's how they did it. They went to 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kids, and they asked them, what do you think RBST is? Now, you know, the great thing about 6, 7, 8-year-old kids, they got a great imagination. And so they listened to these kids. And then they took what the kids said and they brought a graphic designer, artist in and said, what does this look like? Well, what it looked like was a really tall, scary looking animal of some kind with very sharp teeth, red beady eyes, and every time you touched the animal, you got shocked. That was RBST. So their advertisement started with this Disney character monster-looking thing with the children's voices overlaid talking about what RBST is and describing it as this monster. And then it shifted to this lovely-looking lady who was in her kitchen making cheese sandwiches for her kids and suggesting that the cheese didn't contain any of that stuff because it was RBST free. Well, the reality is there is not a significant safety issue with RBST, but it certainly raised the impression of that. And it casts a aspersion not just on their competitors, but on cheese generally. So as we look for ways to bring people together, let's be honest. Let's not try to disparage the other guy's product if it's safe, if it's okay. Touch the benefits of your, the nutritional value or the taste or the cost or the texture, or all things that will allow you a competitive edge in the marketplace without necessarily tearing the other guy's product down and suggesting that the entire product line is unsafe. Maybe we can organize around that. Or what about this idea? How about the fact that just a few years ago, we had an interesting public-private partnership when it came to research in agriculture and innovation in agriculture. And that public-private deal was that 50% of the research that was done in this space came from the private sector and 50% of it was publicly financed. Today it's 64% privately financed and less than 30% publicly financed. Why is that? Well, Tony Frank can tell you why it is. Don Brown can tell you why it is. I can tell you why it is. You know why it is. It's because budgets are getting cut. Public resources for public universities are being reduced in the name of fiscal responsibility. Well, what's the impact of that out in the countryside? If you're a private sector investor and you're investing in research, your expectation is that that research is going to create profit. And that's a reasonable, understandable expectation. No problem with that. Which means that you're going to charge the farmer, the rancher, the producer for the use of that technology. And it can be pretty expensive, depending upon the magnitude of the technology. But if it's publicly financed, it's available to everybody. It's available for everybody to improve, to innovate on, to change, to modify, to use, without a significant cost associated with it. So I think we need to get back to a day and a place where we have greater balance with publicly financed research in agriculture and food. These are all issues that young people on this campus and campuses across the country could work together, right and left, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, to show the way of how you reach consensus, how you create a sense of community where different ideas can be discussed, debated, a consensus reached, an action plan created and implemented, all of which this country needs. And I think if we do that, then going back to the first speech I gave, then it becomes easier in a farm bill, easier in a state legislature to promote production agriculture and trade, to invest in local and regional food systems, to create an investment in conservation that leverages resources from all of us because we all benefit from conservation, and creates a whole new manufacturing opportunity that is totally innovative. At least you think this notion of plant-based manufacturing is some wild idea. Today, even today in America, it's a $364 billion industry. It's an incredibly powerful opportunity to move away from an over-reliance on fossil fuels and a balancing of our economy. So my pitch here today is for the young people to get engaged and the importance of food, and I will finish with this. Christy and I were in church several years ago in Dubuque, Iowa, and the priest came out and began to give the sermon about the story of the loaves and fishes. You remember that story. Christ is speaking to the 5,000, and he says to his disciples, go feed the people, and they go, we got a few loaves of bread here and a few fish. We can't possibly feed all these people. He says, have faith. Pass the baskets. Pass the baskets, everybody got fed, and by the time they finished, they had more bread and more fish than they started with. The lesson of that parable is the power of community. Individually, there may not have been enough to get it done, but collectively, there was more than enough. We've got to bring that sense of community back to this country. It's great to have debate, and it's great to feel passionate about things, but at the end of the day, if it prevents us from forward progress, then it prevents us from being the America that I think our founding fathers designed this country to be. So the challenge is out there, and I'm looking forward to talking to the young people later today about ways in which we could educate, organize, collaborate, and advocate around food and agriculture, because I think it's got the power to bring us together and show us the way. All right? So with that, Brittany, you and I are going to come up here, and we're going to answer questions.
Thank you, Secretary Vilsack, for the very inspirational words. So we've collected some questions for Secretary Vilsack from the audience and on Twitter. We'll continue to take those questions, so if you're listening, please continue to submit them, and we'll accommodate the best we can. So we were able to get quite a few questions. We'll start off pretty simple and get into the hard ones. You talked about one of the strategic pillars of food policy in local and regional food systems. In what ways can large multinational food companies participate and support these local and regional food systems?
Well, there are a variety of ways. They can be supportive at the federal and state level for contributions and investments that government can make. They all have very important lobbying efforts on various issues, and they can incorporate into their lobbying efforts support for the resources necessary to have more farmers markets, to be able to put investments in food hubs. They can invest themselves in these food hubs. And I think they can also create training programs that they can bring people in, and they can work with them to develop business plans. We do this a lot at USDA. We used to do this a lot at USDA and in public universities like CSU, creating ways in which you bring people in who are interested in this, have them evaluate the market, put together a business plan. There's no reason why experts from these large companies can't mentor people that want to start a local and regional food system. It doesn't necessarily compete, it complements what they're doing.
How do you see that culture needing to be changed into companies that aren't used to, they're focused more on profit and they're not focused on the local level?
Well, I think the culture is changing. I think there is an understanding that there's tremendous market potential in local and regional foods, both on the grocery store level. You see this now with even the major retailers having a section where they promote locally grown and raised produce, for example. I think that attitude is changing because the market's changing, and I think again, social media has a lot to do with it. The ability for entrepreneurs to get started and to not necessarily have to spend an awful lot to advertise, to be able to do by word of mouth. There's a yogurt company here, Noosa, that boy, they haven't really marketed much. They started off as a small producer of really good yogurt, and they thought it would just be something they could home deliver as part of their home delivery system. Well, it became so popular, people started talking about it, so grocery stores started demanding it, grocery stores here, and then all of a sudden people like Christy and I come here, we have some Noosa, then we go back to Iowa and go, hey, where's the Noosa? And Hy-Vee goes, okay, we'll buy it, right? So I mean, there's power here in word of mouth, and there's power here in the social media.
Awesome. What is the most important aspect of bridging the divide between the different fragments of our country? How do we re-implement the feeling of community?
Well, I think we start with a group of people that are willing to take the risk of listening, willing to take the risk of not being confrontational, and allowing them to come together around an issue that doesn't necessarily lend itself to division, right? So I think it would be hard. We'd be hard pressed to find anybody on the political spectrum that doesn't believe having access to decent food is important. I think we'd be hard pressed to find anybody who thinks food waste is a good idea. I think there are a lot of folks who are very, very conservative who go to land-grant universities who probably understand the importance of publicly financed research, and so I think that food and agriculture create this platform, and young people a willingness to take a risk and wanting to get along, wanting to have a sense of community. The community that young people have today is interactive, it's Facebook, it's all that. But this is an opportunity to use those tools in a way that allows for dialogue, allows for debate, and reaches a consensus. And then once you've done that, once you've paved the way, once you figure out how to do that, that can be replicated on other issues. Frankly, every issue has an elusive solution to it, but we have to be willing to look for it. And right now what's happening is we're becoming more polarized, and we're less inclined to look for that solution. Somebody's got to lead us, show us the way to reconnect to solution, to problem solving. And because this country has some serious issues it has to deal with. And I think food and agriculture is a way. And what I tried to do at USDA, when I came into USDA, there was a division within agriculture between the organic guys and the local guys and the big guys. Say, hey guys, you're less than 1% of the population. You can't afford to be fighting with each other. You got a message here. You got to talk to the rest of the people. And they began to come together. And the farm bill that we passed in 2014 included investments in local and regional food systems. It included investments in organic research. It was a much more consensus-driven system. And there's not total peace in the valley here, but we're having a better dialogue than we had 8 years ago. So it seems to me that young people can help us figure this out.
Awesome. This one. How do we grapple with the transition from extractive agriculture to sustainable agriculture? This is something we need to incentivize.
Well, I think it's an understanding that you have to add value. You have to be the rural communities of this country can't be simply providing the raw materials for some other community to convert into a value-added product and then having it sold and creating opportunities someplace else. So that's the plant-based manufacturing is a good example. you've got all this raw material, you've got all this waste material from agricultural production, some of which you need to restore the land with, but a lot of it you can transfer to a manufacturing facility, and it can be processed into a chemical, into a material, into a fabric, into a fiber, into energy, into fuel. And so if you do that, you create a manufacturing facility in that rural community. You create 25, 30, 40, 50 good paying jobs. You create an opportunity for young people to see, hey, there's opportunity here. There's a supply chain that eventually forms from that manufacturing facility, all of which is going to be located in and around the rural community. There are people that are going to have to operate the facility. They're going to have to, people are going to have to manufacture it, construct it, repair it. All of a sudden you have a mini economy that's supported from agriculture connection, right? So it seems to me what you want is you want investments in enabling that kind of economy to be located in rural areas. And that requires both public financing, and it also requires private investment. The interesting thing about private investment, the private investment community in New York and in the coast had no clue until two or 3 years ago about all of the opportunity that exists in rural areas. They just didn't think about it. They didn't have to think about it. We forced them to think about it. And now they're saying, well, geez, you know, there's economic opportunity here. There's economic opportunity in improving water systems. There's economic opportunity in expanding broadband. There's economic opportunity in a manufacturing facility. We need to aggregate all of those projects and bring them to the investment community. So there's resources. There's tremendous cash in this country. The question is, where is it going to be invested? So why can't rural America get its fair share? And if it does, it creates an option. It doesn't require people to stay in their small town, but it gives them the chance to come back or stay. Which right now, many of the young people today feel that they don't have that opportunity.
Awesome.
And this is a really important point, folks. And many of you are from rural communities, so you probably know this, but for those of you who aren't, understand the emotional toll here. You live in a small town that 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago was quite prosperous. Small town, main streets filled up, small businesses doing well, church supported, school having lots of kids in it, hospital supported, had population. Over a period of 10, 15, 20, 30 years as we transitioned, as we got more efficient, as we didn't need as many people in farming, et cetera, slow, all of a sudden that facility, that manufacturing facility goes someplace else. Some of those small town, Main Street retail shops have to close. The population in the school comes down to the point where they have to think about merging with one of their arch rivals down the road. Their kids are going to get bused. And then you see your sons and daughters and your grandsons and granddaughters feeling they have to leave. It's a really emotional toll. What we have to do is restore a sense that there is a better tomorrow than there is today. And as we deal with some of these other tragic issues that we're seeing in rural areas with the opioid crisis and so forth, if you don't think your tomorrow is going to be any better than your today, you're looking for an escape. So part of my theory about this rebuilding this economy is creating a better tomorrow, creating a pathway to a better tomorrow. Will it work for every community? Maybe not, but it'll work for a lot of communities. And it'll create centers of economic activity which will bring agriculture, manufacturing together, creating an economy that is sustainable. So I think you've got to invest, you have to have a strategy, you have to have a plan, and you have to sell it, you have to market it, you have to create local leaders who embrace it. And part of what a mission of a land-grant university through extension is to create the leadership, to show the way, to create partnerships, to figure out ways in which that private sector money can be invested.
Awesome. What are your views on how the elimination or renegotiation of fair trade agreement will affect international supply and demand dynamics?
Well, I'll just use the dairy example because it's the one I'm most familiar with right now. If we were to get out of NAFTA tomorrow, as some have suggested, Mexico is our #1 export location for our dairy. 1 out of every 7 tankers that you see on the road that's transporting milk goes to an export market. And nearly 30% of those exports go to one country, Mexico. So if, for whatever reason, we reinstituted tariffs and made it more difficult for American U.S. dairy to get into the Mexican market, we would A, create opportunities for the EU and for New Zealand, and B, we would have a glut of milk here in this country, which would mean that more and more dairy producers would go out of business, which also, by the way, 25% of our beef comes from dairy. So it would have a rippling effect throughout the entire agricultural economy. You know, there are some things with NAFTA that need to be fixed, one of which is the Canadian system that's very, very much restricted in terms of exports. But you can't get out of these agreements. That's not the way to do it. Improve them, work at it, negotiate. But if you pull out, combined with the fact that we pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, let me just tell you what happened there. Here's the deal. America represents 5% of the world's consuming population. In about 20 years, our percentage will be 3%. So that means that 95 to 97% of the world's consumers live someplace other than the United States. You're a business person. Does that make sense that you would want to do business with 95 to 97% of a customer base? Doesn't make sense to me. Asia. Today, there are 525 million middle-class consumers in Asia, many of whom are interested in purchasing American agricultural products because they understand the quality, the safety, the cost, the affordability of it. It's a status symbol in many Asian countries to consume American agricultural products. That's today. In 15 years, that number will go from 525, 530 million to 3.2 billion. 15 years. That's 10 times the population of the United States. In just middle-class consumers. I'm not talking about all the consumers in Asia, just middle-class consumers. Why would we not want to do business with 3.2 billion people who want our stuff? By pulling out of TPP, we now have to have bilateral agreements with each of the countries in that region. They are really hard to negotiate. Really, really hard to negotiate. Here's why. Because in agriculture, our markets are already pretty much open. So it's not like we have a lot to give. We want access to their markets because we want the ability to sell our manufactured goods, our technology, our sort of our high-priced stuff, our automobiles and things like that. So in our economy, automobiles, steel, aluminum, they're at a really high priority in our negotiation. Agriculture, not so high, because we don't have anything to give. The people we're negotiating with, agriculture's at the top of their list. So in order to get something in steel or autos, we may have to allow them to protect their agricultural markets, which means less market opportunity for our people. So by going out of TPP, where we had market access, where we had expanded opportunity, we now have to negotiate bilaterally with those countries where they're more interested in preserving their agricultural economy and we're more interested in selling automobiles. So part of what we need to do, those of us in agriculture and those of us in food, have got to stop talking about agriculture over here and food over here. We have to join them. You have to always talk about agriculture and food together. Why? Because if you start adding all the jobs connected to agriculture and food, you have more jobs than manufacturing in the U.S. Now you're in a position to say, hey, wait a second, agriculture and food needs to be a high priority in negotiations. You allow us to have parity with some of the other manufacturing interests that right now are sort of the exclusive focus of our trade negotiations. So big message here. Never just talk about agriculture, never just talk about food and processing, talk about agriculture and food processing together. It's a much more powerful block to talk about from a political perspective.
So do you think that you talked about these billions of people that are going to be entering our market that our agricultural economy is going to have to support? Do you think we could use that as leverage? We talked earlier before this started about the Farm Bill and leveraging for funding. Do you think that we could use that?
Farm bills are, our conversation started with the fact that if you start a conversation of Farm Bill the way it generally, normally, traditionally starts, you're in a tough spot. Because people now in Washington, D.C., they always start the conversation by saying, here's how much money you have to save. So as soon as you say you have to save, as was the case in 2014, 2012, they say we have to save $26 billion. Well, that means that food assistance is pitted against crop insurance pitted against conservation, conservation pitted against trade, trade pitted against research, pitted against forestry. All of that's in a farm bill. First of all, we should never talk about it as just a farm bill. It's a food bill, it's a jobs bill, it's an energy bill, it's a research bill, it's an innovation bill. It's a lot of bill, right? It's not just a farm bill. So first and foremost, you have to compel the policymakers to define the need first, okay? Say, hey, we got this, you know, incredible population increase that's going to take place. We're going to require an incredible increase in productivity. What are we doing to make sure that America continues to remain a food secure nation? What are we doing to support exports? By the way, to do that, we need more research. To do that, we really need publicly financed research. But you know, in order for our land to continue to produce, we're going to have to make sure it's being replenished, which means we need more conservation. You know, and the reality is, with more intense storms, with hurricanes, with floods, longer droughts, forest fires, you know, you want to debate climate change, fine, but I'm telling you right now, something's happening out there, and we're going to have more intense weather patterns, and when that happens, farmers are going to be at greater risk, so we need risk management tools that are adequately financed. You start defining the need, and then when they say, oh my gosh, that price tag is too much, we say, wait, let's figure out innovatively how we leverage federal resources. There are examples of this in the last Farm Bill, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, the new Research Foundation. Those were put in the Farm Bill in part to leverage additional resources in things that we didn't have enough public money for, but we understood there was a need. Define the need first, I think, is the way to do it. I'm really concerned that what's going to happen is they're going to say, you got to save $15 billion, and that creates sort of a conflict. It creates a competition for scarce resources.
Awesome. Another question, based on your previous example of dairy and use of antibiotics, how about subtherapeutic use of antibiotics in poultry and swine? Is there a real danger to all of us when drugs for human use are no longer effective due to the use in livestock?
There's clearly a need for a One Health approach here, and I think that's why we were supportive of the change that antibiotics should be used under the auspices of a veterinarian and for management of diseases. I think you're seeing a move away from the use of these for other purposes because resistances can be built up. I think we also have to figure out, again through research, probiotics and figuring out ways in which we can avoid these superbugs creating problems where our medicines just simply don't work. Part of it is animal agriculture's responsibility. Part of it is also the responsibility of the medical community. This is a tough issue. It's a very tough issue because you got a sick animal, you got a sick child, you're going to want to make sure that that animal and that child's cared for. But we have to be judicious in terms of how we use these medications because there is a buildup, there is a resistance building up, and it's an issue.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question. Is agricultural extension education still relevant? How can it be improved and utilized to spread innovation?
Well, it's funny. When I traveled internationally, I went to a lot of countries, a lot of developing countries. The one thing that I was always asked about, and the one thing that folks wanted to replicate, whether it was in India or Afghanistan or in Kenya, was extension. We really take extension for granted in this country, and we shouldn't. It has a very powerful responsibility. And one of the responsibilities, tying it back to my remarks, is building the community leadership. You can have a sustainable economy model, you can have investments and programs that will help create that kind of opportunity in communities, but if you don't have community leadership to embrace it and to lead it and to implement it, it won't work. So extension and programs like FFA, programs like 4-H, all of that helps to create the leadership potential and to identify the leadership potential of a community. It's there. Every community has a budding leader. Many of these people may not think of themselves as leaders. They may not see themselves as leaders. They may not know what to do, what the first thing to do is. But I think Extension plays an incredibly important role in leadership development and can. And so for that reason alone, it's relevant. Now, then there's all the other incredible stuff that Extension does, the information it provides. Especially now, to be relevant, you have to understand it can't operate under the way it operated 40 years ago or 20 years ago or even 5 years ago. I mean, with technology and social media, there are ways in which you have to understand how people, as younger people, are getting their information, looking for information. You have to basically be able to adapt your programs to ensure that you're reaching the audience. But I think there's an incredibly important responsibility for Extension.
Awesome. Thank you, Secretary Vilsack and the audience for all your great questions.
All right, thank you.
Oh, we have more questions. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Questions for, yeah, okay.
A few more questions from the audience here.
Okay.
How do we invest in rural America but ensure it still stays rural? Thriving economies can bring more people and produce agriculture.
Well, the sustainable economy that I'm envisioning is predominantly based on maintaining agricultural land in an agricultural purpose, whether it's production agriculture and exports, local and regional food systems, conservation, and even the manufacturing aspect of this doesn't necessarily require a lot of farmland. It doesn't necessarily require a lot of farmland for the manufacturing facility, but will require the raw materials from farms to be able to support the manufacturing concern. So, you know, the reality is that you're not going to have a massive manufacturing facility that employs 1,000 people being located on this plant-based notion. This is relatively small manufacturing. So you're not going to have, 40 of these located in a community. You're going to have 1 or 2, right? But they're going to be 50 jobs, 100 jobs. Big deal for a small town. Very big deal for a small town. That creates enough activity in that small town to support the Main Street retailer. It creates enough activity and enough kids so that your local school has adequate population to support a school, doesn't feel constrained or doesn't feel the need to merge. The ability to attract and retain quality teachers. The ability to have a healthcare facility that services the region because you can attract a doctor or 2 because you have enough people to support it. I don't think the worry here is that you're going to have overcrowding. I think the worry here is that you're going to continue to see a shrinkage of rural populations and all of, when I go out to rural communities, people are they are so passionate about saving their school, so passionate about saving their hospital, so passionate about saving tax-supported institutions because that's how they define themselves. Candidly, that's the wrong way of thinking. You want tax-paying institutions. You want private sector investment that creates enough revenue and activity to support the tax-supported institutions. And your community needs to be identified by that. Because if you're just hanging on, then you're not open to the chance of a manufacturing opportunity. You're not open to this local and regional food system, which may be counter to your thought process, but there's an opportunity there. You're not open to land going into conservation. You're not open to the recreational opportunities that it could potentially create. So I don't think the risk here is that you're going to have overpopulation. The risk is that you're going to continue to see a shrinkage of populations. And again, not every community is going to survive. That's the fact. But there are enough communities out there to maintain the rural value system. I mentioned military service. And people say to me, well, of course kids are going to the military because that's the only option they have. And I say to them, well, maybe, but here's my thought process about this. I think when you grow up in a rural community surrounded by agriculture, you grow up surrounded by people that understand something very, very basic about the land, which is that you can't keep taking from the land. You can't just keep planting a crop and harvesting the crop and never putting something back in the land, because eventually that land will stop producing. So there's a value system that something that's of value to you, something that's giving you value, requires you to give something back to it. Kids grow up intuitively. That sort of enters their system. And so they look around, they go, well, this is a pretty amazing country we have here. It gives us a lot of freedoms and so forth. How do I pay it back? Well, military service. But it's not just military service. I think you'll find a lot of kids who go to urban centers, those who are volunteering. Most often you say to them, well, you know, where are you from? Well, I'm a small town up the road. Why are you volunteering? Well, you know, that's just kind of what we do back home. It's a sense of giving back. And I think that's a value system that needs to be preserved in this country, needs to be enhanced in my view. And to do that, you need economic activity. You need something exciting, you need something innovative, you need something different happening. And you just can't rely on same old, because you're just going to continue to see it dwindling, because it's an extraction economy. People get more efficient at extraction, but then they take it and they add value someplace else, and that's where the opportunity is. So the question is, how do you add value at home? And one way to do it is by, you know, you may become an organic producer because that adds value right there, because it's a higher priced product, right? Or you may convert that into something more valuable, a fuel, a material, a chemical. That adds value, creates jobs. That's the strategy here, and that's more sustainable, because you're creating value, you're creating jobs, you're creating economic activity. It's sustainable. Extraction economy, it's a one-way street.
Awesome. Thank you, Secretary Vilsack. So we'd like to present with you a small token of your appreciation and time for your insight today. Per the inscription, we also present this with gratitude, recognition for your service in our nation as Secretary of Agriculture.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, look at this. Wow, thank you. Oh my gosh, look at that. Well, that's beautiful.
Pretty cool.
You said, no question where this is from. Thank you. Well,
Thank you.
There's a spot for it back home. Thank you very much. This is great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks very
Students,
much.
you are welcome to join Secretary Vilsack in a special student forum down the hall in room 308 at 10:30. It's now time for a networking break. Please help yourself to refreshments and snacks. As a reminder, use the hashtag CSU AgInnovation on Twitter, and please return by 10:30 for our panel on game-changing science and technology poised to disrupt the agricultural supply. Okay, I lost it. 10:15, please. Come on.
Yeah, I know that the woes and the weight of the world can get inside our minds and be too much sometimes. I know. But baby, don't let the no's and the ups and the downs from the roller coaster ride beat you up inside. Baby, don't. But if you ever feel that way, don't you ever hesitate. You got my number, you can call on me. If you in trouble, put the fall on me. When you're mad, you can take it out on me. When it don't add up, you can count on me. When you're low, come get high on me. Make it slow, take your time on me. Settle in, let it out, come and lay on me. When it gets heavy, put the weight on me. Baby, put it all on me. Put it all on me. You out on the town on my dime anytime. Tell me when you're free. We can do anything and everything you want. Yeah. Oh, I wanna hear all your fears and your troubles. Strip it down, really get to know one another. when it's nobody but you and me, just us. Girl, you know I'm here for you. You can lean on me anytime you need to. You got my number, you can call on me. If you in trouble, put the fall on me. When you're mad, you can take it out on me. When I don't add up, you can count on me. When you're low, come get high on me. Make it slow, take your time on me. Settle in, let it out, come and lay on me. When it gets heavy, put the weight on me. Baby, put it all on me. Girl, put it all on me. All right. Come on, relax your mind on me. When you need a shoulder, you could cry on me. Baby, you can bet your life on me. And put it all on me. You got my number, you can call on me. If you in trouble, put the fall on me. When you're mad, you can take it out on me. Yeah, when I don't add up, you can count on me. When you're low, come get high on me. Make it slow, take your time on me. Settle in, let it out, come and lay on me. When it gets heavy, put the weight on me. Baby, put it all on me. Yeah, baby, put it all on me. Yeah, put it all on me. Yeah. Girl, put it all on me. Put it all on me. Them jeans are faded in all the right places. Got me hanging on tight to your curves like little erases. Girl, your funky little backbeats got me feeling like I'm tipsy and I ain't even had a drink. I wanna kiss you in the parking lot under the moonlight. Kiss you running red lights, baby, set the mood right. Just like everything you're doing to me right now is making me crazy. I wanna kiss you on the dance floor, kiss you like a let's go. Come on, baby, let me hear you say oh oh. I wanna kiss you with the neon lights in your eyes glowing. Then I wanna kiss you in the morning. Yeah, yeah, I wanna kiss you in the morning. Oh, you little outlaw, stealing my heart and all. When you drop it down low, touch your toes, girl, you know you just showing off. That little tattoo on your tan line, oh my, pretty little butterfly. What else have you got to hide? I wanna kiss you in the parking lot under the moonlight. Kiss you running red lights, baby, set the mood right. Just like everything you're doing to me right now is making me crazy. I wanna kiss you on the dance floor, kiss you like a let's go. Come on, baby, let me hear you say oh oh. I wanna kiss you with the neon lights in your eyes glowing. Then I wanna kiss you in the morning. Yeah, I wanna kiss you in the morning. I wanna kiss you in the parking lot under the moonlight. Kiss you running red lights, baby, set the mood right. Just like everything you're doing to me right now is making me crazy. I wanna kiss you on the dance floor, kiss you like a let's go. Come on, baby, let me hear you say oh oh. I wanna kiss you with the neon lights in your eyes glowing. Then I wanna kiss you in the morning. I wanna kiss you in the morning, morning. reach for the phone, not a word from you, baby. It don't leave my side since we had that fight. Can't remember, but maybe I blew you up in the middle of the night again. You were drinking with your friends, you ignored it, but you got it. I get so neurotic about it, baby, 'cause I know you're reading your phone. I can't help from going crazy, thinking you might not be all alone. I wake up, I check it, I shower and I check it. I feel the buzz in my truck and I almost wreck it. I always got it on me, just in case you want me. So if you're looking for my love, then light it up. Every time I unlock my screen, I hope I see one of them red lipstick I miss you pictures. I'm on your clock, you're in control. You want me now, baby, go figure. My world's at the tips of your fingers. I get so neurotic about it, baby, 'cause I know you're reading your phone. I can't help from going crazy, thinking you might not be all alone. I wake up, I check it, I shower and I check it. I feel the buzz in my truck and I almost wreck it. I always got it on me, just in case you want me. So if you're looking for my love, then light it up. Yeah, baby, light it up. I go to sleep, I check it. In the middle of the night, I check it. I feel the buzz in my bed and I don't get no rest. I always got it on me, just in case you want me. So if you're looking for my love, then light it up. Yeah, baby, light it up.
Now, since you turned the tables on me, I've been steady learning lonely, keeping this turntable spinning. Everything from Jones to Jennings, slowly planning my survival in a 3-foot stack of vinyl. Since you had to walk out of here, I've been having a record year. I bet you thought before you left I'd just sit in silence by myself, turn this house into a jail, dying slow in a living hell. But love's got a funny way of keeping score, and your leaving lit up my scoreboard. I usually make it through side A sober. All bets are off when I flip her over. One bourbon, one scotch, one beer. I'm having a record year. Quarter notes and Hank's halftime, a pounding on this heart of mine. Song to song, I pass my time with these speakers on 10. Your good and gone keeps me up all night along with songs in the key of life. I'm either gonna get over you or I'm gonna blow out my ears. Yeah, you're out there now doing God knows how, and I'm stuck here having a record year. Your leaving left me going crazy. I'm counting on a needle to save me. I drop it in the groove, and we go round and round and down in a spiral. I guess I really ought to call and thank you. I rediscovered Red-Headed Stranger, got down with old James Brown, and found new grass revival. If you find your way back, I owe you a beer for my record year. Quarter notes and Hank's halftime, a pounding on this heart of mine. Song to song, I pass my time with having a record year. Yeah, I'm having a record year.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Young people speaking their minds are getting so much resistance from behind. Time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. What a field day for the heat. 1,000 people in the street, singing songs and carrying signs. Mostly say hooray for our side. It's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Paranoia strikes deep into your life, it will creep. It starts when you're always afraid. Step out of line, the man come and take you away. We better stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going. We better stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going. We better stop now. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going. We better stop. Children, what's that sound?
Yes, a small town girl living in a lonely world. She took the midnight train going anywhere. Yes, a city boy, born and raised in South Detroit. He took the midnight train going anywhere. A singer in a smoking room, smell of wine and cheap perfume. For a small they can share the night. It goes on and on and on and on. Strangers waiting up and down the boulevard, their shadows searching in the night. Streetlights, people living just to find emotion, hiding somewhere in the night. Working hard to get my fill. Everybody wants to free ya. Paying anything to roll the dice just one more time. Some will win, some will lose. Some are gonna sing the blues. What a movie never is. It goes on and on and on and on. Strangers waiting up and down the boulevard, their shadows searching in the night. Streetlights, people living just to find emotion, hiding somewhere in the Don't stop believing. Hold on to that green air. Streetlights, people. Don't stop believing. Hold on. Streetlights, people. Don't stop believing. Hold on to that green iron. Streetlights, people. Don't stop believing. Hold on to that green iron. Streetlights, people. Don't stop believing. Streetlight people. Don't stop. Why drink the water from my hand contagious as you think I am. Just took my son towards your domain. You can't run it over again. Don't scream about, don't think aloud. Turn your head now, baby, just spit me out. Don't worry about, don't speak about. Turn your head now, baby, just spit me out. Why follow me to higher ground? Lost as you swear I am. Don't throw away your basic needs. Ambience and vanity. Don't scream about, don't think aloud. Turn your head now, baby, just spit me out. Don't worry about, don't speak about. Turn your head now, baby, just spit me out. Don't scream about, don't think aloud. Turn your head now, baby, just spit me out. Don't worry about, don't speak about. Turn your head now, baby, just spit me out. Don't scream about, don't think aloud. Turn your head now, baby, just spit me out. Don't worry about, don't speak about. Turn your head now, baby, just spit me out. Don't scream about, don't think aloud. Turn your head now, baby, just spit me out. Don't worry about, don't speak about. Turn your head now, baby, just spit me out.
I can't get no satisfaction. I can't get no satisfaction 'cause I tried and I tried and I tried.
and she grew up right with them Indiana boys on an Indiana night. Well, she moved down here at the age of 18. She blew the boys away, it was more than they'd seen. I was introduced and we both started grooving. She said, I dig you, baby, but I got to keep moving on. Keep moving on. Last dance with Mary Jane. One more time to kill the pain. I feel summer creeping in and I'm tired of this town again. Well, I don't know, but I've been told you never slow down, you never grow old. I'm tired of screwing up, I'm tired of going down, I'm tired of myself, I'm tired of this town. Oh my, oh hell yes. Honey, put on that party dress. Buy me a drink, sing me a song. Take me as I come, cause I can't stay long. Last dance with Mary Jane. One more time to kill the pain. I feel summer creeping in and I'm tired of this town again. There's pigeons down on Market Square. She's standing in her underwear, looking down from a hotel room. The nightfall will be coming soon. Oh my, oh hell yes. You got to put on that party dress. It was too cold to cry when I woke up alone. I hit my last number, I walked to the road. Last dance with Mary Jane. One more time to kill the pain. I feel summer creeping in and I'm tired of this town again.
It's been 1 week since you looked at me, cocked your head to the side and said I'm angry. 5 days since you laughed at me, saying get back together, come back and see me. 3 days since the living room, I realized it's all my fault but couldn't tell you. Yesterday you'd forgiven me, but it'll still be 2 days till I say I'm sorry.
Hold it now and watch the hoodwink. Does it make you stop, think? You'll think you're looking at Aquaman. I summon fish to the dish, although I like the chalet Swiss. I like the sushi cause it's never touch a frying pan. Hot like wasabi when I bust rhymes. Speak like Leanne rhymes because I'm all about value. Bert Camper's got the mad hits. You try to match wits, you try to hold me but I bust through. Gonna make a break and take a fake out like a sneak and they can shake out like vanilla. It's the finest of the flavors. Gonna see the show cause then you'll know the vertigo is gonna go cause it's so dangerous you'll have to sign a waiver. Can't I help it if I think you're funny when you're mad? Trying hard not to smile though I feel bad. I'm the kind of guy who laughs at a funeral. Can't understand what I mean, well you soon will. I have a tendency to wear my mind on my sleeve. I have a history
looked at me. Threw your arms in the air and said you're crazy. 5 days since you tackled me. I still got the red burns on both my knees. It's been 3 days since the afternoon. You realize it's not my fault, but a moment too soon. Yesterday you'd forgiven me, and now I'll sit back and wait till you say you're sorry.
China, the Chinese chicken. You have a drumstick and your brain stops sticking. Watching X-Files with no lights on, with all our maisons. I hope the smoking man's in this one like Harrison Ford. I'm getting frantic, like Sting and Pen Trick, like Snickers guaranteed to satisfy. Like Kurosawa, I make mad films. Okay, I don't make films, but if I did, they'd have a samurai. Gonna get a set of better clubs, gonna find the kind with tiny nubs, so my irons are always flying off the backswing. Gonna get into my Sailor Moon, cause that cartoonist got the boom anime babes that make me think the wrong thing. How can I help it if I think you're funny when you're mad? Trying hard not to smile, though I feel bad. I'm the kind of guy who laughs at a funeral. Can't understand what I mean, you soon will. I have a tendency to wear my mind on my sleeve. I have a history of losing my shirt.
It's been 1 week since you looked at me. Dropped your arms to the sides and said I'm sorry. 5 days since I laughed at you and said you just did just what I thought you were gonna do. 3 days since the living room. We realized we're both to blame, but what could we do? Yesterday, you just smiled at me, cause it'll still be 2 days till we say we're sorry. It'll still be 2 days till we say we're sorry. It'll still be 2 days till we say we're sorry. Where's my stadium home of the Robbie?
Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin again in 2 minutes. Please begin to take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin shortly. Please take your seats.
Got nothing against the big town. Still hayseed enough to say, look who's in the big town. But my bed is in a small town. Oh, that's good enough for me.
I wasn't kidding about the cowbell and using that, right? The lead cow being out there. Hey, welcome back. We had a great networking session. We had the chance to be able to talk a little bit, exchange ideas, following what Secretary Vilsack said. You know, I think it's that conversation, that opportunity to catalyze the things that we're talking about, being able to build relationships and drive things forward that make it so valuable for us to get together and be part of this ag innovation ecosystem that you see that Karina's been drawing up for there around those pillars. I just want to encourage you a little bit, though, take advantage of this to build the conversation out. As you may know, we're live streaming this now, so you can let folks know if they can't attend us in the room, they can get that live stream for them by going out to the CSU Ag Innovation Summit website. We're also tweeting things out. And in fact, I've been tweeting to both my followers about what a great time that we're having here. But I wanted you to know that if you want to do that, we're all about incentivizing, just like Secretary Vilsack said. If you would like to be able to tweet things out, we can do that for you at CSU Ag Innovation. Hashtag CSU Ag Innovation. That's not a number sign, my daughter tells me. We can tweet that out, and one of the things we're going to do to incentivize it is that each time you tweet using that hashtag, you're entered to win a pair of tickets to Saturday's Ag Day Barbecue. It's going to be right out over here. Going to be a terrific time for us. And the football game at the CSU new on-campus stadium every time you tweet. So I expect to see a little bit more traffic. The most popular tweet, measured by the combined tweets, likes, and retweets, will receive a pair of all-inclusive passes to our next Ag Innovation Summit. Maybe we'll wrangle you your own cowbell as part of that. So you have to be present at the announcement of the winners during our closing debrief panel tomorrow in order to be able to win. But send those tweets out and really expand that conversation. Hey, let's do a little more conversing. I'm really proud to introduce one of our top-notch students, Rachel Seedorf, a soil and crop sciences major here at CSU. Rachel, you're getting ready to graduate pretty quick. And she's going to go ahead and facilitate this next session for us and get us started. Rachel, would you join me, please?
Good morning, everyone. As Dr. Pritchett said, I am a senior here at CSU, majoring in soil and crop sciences. It's great to see all of you here this morning. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to the moderator of our first panel session, What's Next in the Agriculture Supply Chain. Dr. Alan S. Rudolph serves as the Vice President for Research at Colorado State University. Dr. Rudolph has had an active career in translating interdisciplinary life sciences into useful applications for biotechnology development. His experience spans basic research to advanced development in academia, government laboratories, and most recently in the nonprofit and private sectors. Welcome, Dr. Rudolph.
Thank you very much. What an honor it is to open up the first panel of this Ag Innovation Summit. First of all, I'd like to just congratulate James. You're doing a great job, and I would vote for more cowbell as the hashtag for putting out there. But no, it's really exciting to have this opportunity to share with you our panel conversation. And you know, we took some time to think about this panel in the following way. Innovation grabs us in so many different ways, and in the ag sector, there are three particular vectors we wanted to explore in this panel, and we found some really outstanding people to represent them. And so what I'd like to do is introduce briefly each of them, and as I introduce them, they can walk up and take a seat on the stage, and I'll start out with Howard Yana Shapiro. Howard is the Chief Agricultural Officer at Mars Corporation, a multinational, now nearly a $40 billion company. You've probably been watching them in the news as they made a most recent acquisition of VCA, very important to us in the region, a veterinary organization that we know well. And Howard is also a senior fellow at the University of California, Davis in the Department of Plant Sciences. He's a science advisor at the MIT Media Lab. And most importantly, as you hear Howard and read about his bio, he's had a very strong career in looking at under-resourced regions in the agricultural science and technology, and as such, he's a distinguished fellow at the World Agroforestry Center in Nairobi, Kenya. So Howard, come on up, and while he's doing that, I'll start to introduce our second panelist. So Howard, before I do that, Howard is really going to represent the biological innovations. He's, through his background, as you read, he's a geneticist, been largely involved with lots of aspects of Mars science and technology, but really had an impact worldwide in terms of trait genetics and what it means both for resourced and under-resourced regions. So we have, I couldn't think of a more outstanding panelist to sort of think about and represent the biological innovations that could affect ag in the future. What are those implications? The second panelist is Dana Johnson-Downing. Dana Johnson-Downing comes to us, she'll talk to us about her company, TraceGains. And Dana Johnson-Downing is the Director of Strategic Partnerships for TraceGains. It's a software system she'll be describing. What Dana really brings to the table, she's had a long record in public service, and she's also been a service member in the U.S. Army Reserve. What she brings to the panel is really a look at the information sciences and technology. As you hear about TraceGains and what they do, it'll open our minds to the innovations that we all see around big data, around information systems and information technology and traceability and what that means for ag. So Dana, come on up. Oh, there you are. So now we've had the bio and the info sort of vectors, and our last speaker panelist represents sort of the physical sciences and the sensor areas. We've seen an explosion of sensors and what they can do in terms of the device power. All of us walking around with a very strong data collection, aggregation, and analytical device in our pockets now. And our third panelist is Eyal Gerecht, who is the President and Chief Technology Officer of a company called Terabat. And Terabat is a sensor platform that you'll be hearing a little bit about as Eyal introduces the company. But I think we all, again, appreciate the amount of sensor data that is available to us now, whether it's weather data, whether it's data sensors that are collecting more information about our environment, our climate, about the supply chain. And so Eyal will really represent the physical sector and the sensor innovations that we will talk about in relation to the ag sector. So Eyal, come on up. What we've decided to do, and I'll take a seat here in a moment, is I'll let the speakers take about 5 minutes each to talk about innovation. So what are they innovating against? What are the problems that they see that innovation in their focus is being applied to? And then I'll ask them to comment each in their opening remarks a little bit about how that fits into the trends that they see in their sectors. Now, Mars is a large multinational company with lots of sectors of business, but yet I think Howard can talk about this in the context of the things like biological innovations we see, like CRISPR-Cas and things like that. And each of the speakers will take on that sort of question of what is the problem they're trying to innovate against, and how do they see their technologies trending in that way. So let me have a seat and we'll get started, and we'll have some conversation up front here, and invite, as you heard the organizers, your questions, your comments. And so I encourage you to be thinking about those. There's cards at your table. You can give those to people to bring them up to us. And we'll turn to the audience and see what your questions are. We want this to be a conversation, as you've heard. And the people we brought up here on stage, I think, can stimulate that conversation, and we'll continue to try to do so. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll sit down here. And maybe I'll start with Howard. Howard, biotechnology and the biosciences really are moving at a fast pace, and I think on everyone's mind, most recently, of course, is gene editing and gene editing tools, which continued to advance. In fact, trait development has been a big part of what we've seen in innovation in the ag sector. As you heard Dean Menon talk about agricultural sector and sort of the advances that have been made. Jim Clapper recently called CRISPR-Cas9 a weapon of mass destruction in the Senate in 2016, and so there's been a huge interest in what kinds of tools are available or developing, and how are they safe? I bring that out as an example, but maybe Howard, you'd like to talk a little bit about how you see the innovations at Mars. What are the issues that you're focused on, and how biosciences and biotechnology is playing a role in that?
Sure, if we could just pull up this one slide. I just wanted to show this one little quick slide for a few moments. Part of supply chains have to do with new ways of working, which is part of our topic. And the only way this works is uncommon collaborations. The collaborations that used to be the standard bearers of activity around the world no longer have meaning in the same way. You can't really depend on the government. You can't depend on foundations. You can't depend on the sort of the methodology of the National Science Foundation continuously funding you. So we formed a little group called the African Orphan Crops Consortium. You can see from the slide, it's a pretty wide-ranging group of people. The express purpose, different from the word that Secretary Vilsack used, I would prefer if he used the word nutrition instead of food. Because hollow calories, which are what many people eat every day, are a real problem. So we're looking to improve 101 food crops simultaneously in Africa using the most advanced biological technologies, the most advanced sequencers, the most advanced utilization of that information, all in the public domain. And it's sponsored by the NEPAD, which is the African Union's development arm. And when we started it, there was a question about, how much technology can we use? Can we use marker-assisted selections? What will the Europeans say? Will they shut us out of their markets because they have certain views about technology which are not shared in other parts of the world? So I put this slide up just to say that the way we have thought about supply chains, the way we thought about collaborations, really needs to not have a theory of change, but a change of theory. Because the way we've been operating no longer has really an effect in the way it should have in the world. So only 37% of the rural population of Africa suffers chronic hunger and malnutrition. So that causes stunting, which means you'll never neurologically, physically, or economically develop 100%. 48% of India in the rural sector suffers stunting. And shockingly, 7% of the United States suffers stunting. It's all can be fixed through nutrition. But it's not nutrition in a little package. It has to be grown, and you have to have it available, and it has to make the rural sector vibrant again. At the same time, 4.5 billion people suffer aflatoxin poison every day. Aflatoxin is a mycotoxin. Some of you may know about it. You hear about it in peanuts every now and then. But in a bad year in the United States, fumonisin, which is a mycotoxin, causes $1.6 billion worth of losses to the U.S. maize industry. So these are huge numbers. And when 4.6 billion people eat aflatoxin every day and poison themselves, you wake up in the morning and say, I got to do something about it. And the only way to really do anything about it, since there's no natural resistance, though some has been shown possibly in maize, is to think outside the box of a supply chain. And today that means, how would you put a puzzle together that could be solved by a large group of people? So on October 16th, we'll put a series of puzzles up on a website called Fold It that has 500,000 players, almost none of them biologists, but they're players. They don't know you can't fold proteins the way that we think you can only fold them. So these people will play this game. All of it will be evaluated. And just to give you an idea how serious Fold It is, Nature ran a paper published by, or presented by Fold It that had 57,000 authors. 57,000 people solved the problem. So we've been working for 30 years to try to solve something like aflatoxin, first with Aflagard, competitive soil mycorrhizae and microorganisms. That failed almost completely. We've tried it other ways, but so now we have to fix the plant and we have to fix storage. So our notion for folding the protein into an enzyme that will attract the aflatoxin and then neutralize it is one way. The other way is using CRISPR-Cas9. And when we talk about CRISPR-Cas9, people are talking about it as a model from about 7 or 8 years ago, because it's not CRISPR-Cas9 version 1 anymore. It's version 8, 9, or 10 that are going on simultaneously. And we work with experts. Coming from private industry, we have that opportunity. So our CRISPR work is done with Jennifer Doudna, one of the two discoverers of this technology. So we're working on peanuts because many of you probably like peanut M&Ms, and we have trouble with aflatoxin. Some of you eat maize, and maize is a really big problem in many parts of the world. 70% of the maize we use in products in India is rejected, but it doesn't go to the incinerator, it goes into the food chain in a different place. So by doing good for ourselves, we do bad for society. So we're forced to act differently than corporations did 25 or 30 years ago, and to look at cutting-edge technologies with no regard at this point for what happens if an activist group stands up and says it's not allowed. It's usually from lack of information, like gene editing. This is not the same as genetically engineering. It's a very interesting technology. It'll work in humans as it's done in a couple terrible disease situations in the United States and in Europe. It's going to work in animals, and it's going to work in plants where I live. And so we think these technologies offer opportunities that never ever were offered to us before. And it's the responsibility of society and corporations and uncommon collaborations to take these technologies and apply them for the benefit of society.
Thanks, Howard. And he brought up two important concepts there. One we'll come back to on democratization of science, and the other one about collaborations. We'll come back to those. Dana, I'd like to turn to you because Foldit's a great example of lots of data coming in from lots of different places, some of it unverified, some of it you don't know if I should include it. Do they become one of the 57,000 authors or not? Your company, and maybe you could talk a little bit about trace gains, but you're really in the traceability. How do you verify information? What do you do with that information? Whether it's in biology or other areas, this is really important. But you could talk a little bit about trace gains and sort of the information technology position it's holding with regard to information.
Sure. Trace Gains is software. We're a company just down the road in Westminster. And we like to say that we're revolutionizing information exchange across the supply chain. And what do we mean by that? What kind of information? Our customers are food manufacturers, brokers, distributors, in that middle part of the food supply chain. So you've got the first mile of agriculture, and the last mile of the food supply chain is retail and the consumer. So we're that middle part that's working to ensure food safety, quality, and that your business relationships in that middle part of the food supply chain are verified. So our software goes out and collects GFSI certifications, insurance documents, on and on and on. And we're trying to interject some standardization to this process. You would be surprised at how antiquated some food manufacturers are when it comes to both their internal processes, but in terms of the way that they manage data and documents. We often are a solution that comes in behind and replaces 3-ring binders and spreadsheets. So what we've sought to do is to take technology and go in and gather that documentation. So we automate the gathering of that information, take that off of the quality person's job so that they can get back to the job they were hired to do. And then we're able to analyze that data, offer visualization tools so that someone in R&D or quality or food safety can see which of their suppliers are in compliance, which are out. How can they, if they find something that has been shipped in a lot that's not in compliance, can they negotiate a discount? Do they have to reject that lot? It's an information management tool that they can have to do their jobs better. And then ultimately, we have a safer food supply. One of the things that we do is specification publishing. So one of the largest food manufacturers in the world uses our system to publish their specifications, and then their suppliers have to say, yeah, we can meet this, or can we make this change? And what that does is it puts everyone, one source of the truth for what's going to be in specification, what's not going to. So what we like to think is that information exchange, it's not a company, it's not one software company. We're trying to build an ecosystem and a platform. And I think one of the largest challenges in this kind of environment is we're not the only ones that do this. We happen to think we're really good, we're probably the best at it. As we move forward, how do we have these disparate systems talking to each other? You know, because ultimately, it is about food safety, but it's about creating higher standards and raising the bar. For trace gains, the Food Safety Modernization Act, I'm sure many of you have been dealing with this new regulatory environment that we find ourselves in. It's a good thing. It's a good thing to raise the bar on food safety. And unfortunately, there's a hunger for information out there about it within food manufacturing, R&D people, from farmers themselves, all the way through the supply chain, foreign suppliers. People don't know what their responsibility is yet. And it's one of the mantles that we've taken up to almost offer sort of our own extension service, for lack of a better word. TraceGain spends a lot of our time and resources on developing tools and holding educational seminars, using distance learning technology like webinars, to sort of educate the industry on what their responsibilities are and how technology can be a part of that solution.
Great, thanks. And you know, what's behind all that data, of course, is the ability to take measurement, and you know, a lot of the electronic records that TraceGains is working on depend on, you know, the feeds, as she said, the data verification of what goes into the supply chain with regard to the information system. Behind that, of course, is a lot of sensor measurement. And you know, I think what you heard Dean Menon talk about in innovation, you know, in some cases we're reaggregating, doing things a new way as a way of innovating, and I think TraceGains is a great example of that. Our last panelist is from Terabat, and Eyal, you know, it's interesting, we also recognize, I think in the ag sector, when we heard about CRISPR, for example, there's a lot of cross-fertilization of technology, especially as the cost of that technology drops and the ag sector can adopt it. And they borrow from other sectors. And so it's interesting, Terabat got its start with funding from NASA and DARPA and NIST because it's a physical-based sensor measurement. You'll hear in a minute, but I think it's a great example of how we're borrowing platforms, whether it's from, you know, information systems, physical systems, biological systems, and we're seeing them cross-fertilize into the ag innovation sector. So maybe, Al, you could tell us a little bit about Terabat.
Thank you very much. So I guess my contribution here is going to be not giving you the bird eye view, but maybe the trenches, what we as a small company trying to get into very large sector like ag and try to implement or establish revenue-based source to fund us so we can continue doing great things in ag, which is a very large opportunity, and of course in other sectors. So what do? We developed a platform that can detect pathogens based on the VOCs. VOCs are volatile organic compounds. Most of us who can smell or who can interact with other kind of systems do that via those VOCs that are airborne and essentially get to us. So if we can do that, and many of you heard all of these examples about dogs and other kind of animals that can sense those things naturally, but obviously we would like to make it a little bit more clinically and precisely and in a platform that we can plug in and get to work on a routine basis with the same precision. So that's what we do. We develop that, but we did not develop that for ag. We developed that for astrophysical application. And it takes a lot of money and many years sitting in a laboratory trying to develop those sensors, and most of the time they don't work. Any scientist who tell you, I tried something and it worked the first time, is probably not telling you the truth, or is very lucky scientist. So it takes years and years to develop those technologies. And then the next problem that sometimes seems to be even as big as the first problem is how do you package them so you can put them in a certain commercial environment and let all these huge databases be collected. So we as a small company have to deal with all of those aspects of the development of new technology into the field. And you can imagine why ag is very attractive to us. We can play in the healthcare, we can play in other kind of sectors. Healthcare has its own barriers, the FDA to a certain level, physicians that are very resisting new technologies. But in the ag, where the problems are fairly big, the margin is small, but the problems, cost-wise, are very, very big. If you take a small portion of that and you apply solution like ours, like others, you can basically change the way the business is done. And that's good from a safety point of view, and that's good from a financial, from a business point of view. So I'll try to give you the opportunities and the challenges that a company such as ours facing with this new technology.
Great, thanks, Eyal. So I should have mentioned, and we have perspectives here from a large multinational corporation. TraceGains is about a 10-year-old company. Terabat's a relatively newer company, a startup company. So I think also I forgot to mention we have perspectives on innovation that really sort of I think span a perspective across industry. And I want to ask a question to sort of start a little bit more of a conversation on the democratization of innovation. Because we're in a world, I mean, CRISPR-Cas right now, you heard about the search and replace function. It's essentially a search and replace function for genomes. But it's now being done in high school science fairs. You can order these kits online. You can essentially do biotechnology that I couldn't even envision when I was in graduate school. And so we've seen a democratization of a tool like that. We've seen democratization of the information sciences where the data availability to all of us in our pocket connected to those sensors is now widely available and sometimes quite readily shared, as you heard Howard talk about, and even the intentional democratization of information coming out of something like the African Orphan Crops Consortium. I'd like to hear you talk about that and what it means with regard to how you innovate, how you think about innovation in terms of this democratization. It has so many different angles of, cost, as you point out. It lowered the cost, accessibility. But how do you either try to take advantage of that and harness it, or how do you try to defend against it in some cases where it could create some threats? Want to start out, Howard?
Sure. It's really... I'll talk loud. Democratization of science technology. Is it?
Oh, really? I think this one's on. I think it's on.
All right, here we go. When we think about democratization of science and technology, Alan's absolutely correct. Amazon sells CRISPR-Cas9 kits. You can order any one of 6. I wouldn't tell you how good they are. I wouldn't advise you to use it on yourself if you're trying to cure a complex disease. However, what happens is when it gets down to the school fair at a high school, the fear is ameliorated from the science very quickly because the kid comes home and talks to his parents that, I'm using CRISPR-Cas9 and they explain it. In the late 70s and 80s, there were some technologies that were so tightly held by corporations that they became an anathema. And the word GMO is associated with that. Gene editing doesn't fit in that category, so it's really quite extraordinary. The same with sequencing technology. I'm even older than Alan, if you can imagine that possible. But when we were in school, it was Sanger sequencing, and that was half the size of a school bus. Now, Oxford Nanopore is very close to a breakthrough, and they plug into your computer through the USB port and can do phenomenal sequencing. And Illumina Technology, with their HiSeq methodologies, will have a $1,000 genome this year and a $100 genome in 3 or 4 years. So the fact is we have all this in front of us. It doesn't mean anything if we don't know how to use it. And if we don't use it to solve, I think, societal problems. And this is where a company like Mars is privately held can say, we think we need to solve the aflatoxin problem. We think we need to solve the stunting problem as a major force in the activity and to build different types of collaboration. So for us, this use of technology is phenomenal. no one has ever sequenced a factory. I mean, taken all of the swabs and gone through a factory, because all of a sudden you find out there's 5 or 6 different types of salmonella in your factory. You know, everyone thought it was one type, and everyone treated it a certain way. So we're working with IBM and a consortium of other companies to learn how to sequence a factory so we can prevent the very things that you don't want to have in your products. You also need to know how to fix them. And this is where the technology comes in. When we think about democratization, there's one website called Cyverse that holds data that's very interesting in the public domain. Turns out this little company called Google has started something called Google Genomics, which will supplant that very quickly because its capability is much higher. It will also be very, very public. The thing that we have to worry about is some of these technologies getting buried and inaccessible with the exception of a few groups. And that's what I worry about, and that's when these breakthroughs happen, that we have to push them into the public very, very quickly so everyone has access to them.
And you know, the other thing it does, it sort of levels the playing field. Secretary Vilsack talked about the rural economy. Well, you know, it doesn't matter if you're sitting in rural America, you can order your CRISPR-Cas you know, system, or you can plug into an information or a sensor system that might inform you about the world around you. And Dana, you talked about, you know, information aggregation and verification. In the democratized world of you know, innovative people and science, how do you deal with the democratization of information, and how do you bring that into the verification framework that you're developing?
It's not always easy. You know, in the supply chain, there's a lot of competitors that are sharing suppliers, sharing customers, and there's a, you know, probably to a certain extent, a widespread condition of paranoia. And we have this ongoing call for more transparency. Consumers are clamoring for more information. They want to know down to the exact field that their, you know, cereal bar came from. And then as you go up through the supply chain, those information requests get more and more complicated. You know, and then you end up with the farmer who grew the cereal, who wants to cock a shotgun and say, "You want a third-party audit me? You know, get off my property." And so it's very complicated when we try to, as a supply chain, try to solve these larger problems and say, okay, transparency, everybody wants it, nobody wants to give it. Can we identify those things that should be shared, what should be protected, and what platforms are we going to use to share that kind of information? And that's where we see a role for our company, a thought leadership role for our company. But it's going to take a lot of different kinds of people from different companies, different expertise to come to the table in a way where we can say, we don't have to share IP, but let's come to the intersection of these problems. And maybe we develop something that's new and we all share in the IP of that afterwards, but you know, can we you know, put the paranoia on the shelf for long enough to have some meaningful conversations on data democratization and innovation?
Great. Yal, it said that sensors don't lie, but in the context of, you know, collecting sensor information from multiple sources, there's that issue of, you know, how interoperable is it, and how do you deal with that democratization of sensor data? Even though you're sort of looking at one volatile aspect, clearly the prediction of diagnosis and disease is going to take in multiple factors of data, and a lot of that could be coming from different sources.
Yes. Well, let me try and answer that first, and then I have a couple of things to say in response to what I just heard. Yes, the way that you deal with sensors, the way that we deal with engineering or physical problems is usually trying to isolate them as much as we can. So for example, if we know we're looking for one pathogen, we are trying to isolate that, make sure the ecosystem around that is so small and primitive, so we know all the information related only to this mechanism, to this system. And then we're starting to build it up, to make it more and more complex. And sometimes successfully, sometimes not that successfully, then we back off and try that again, and it goes and goes and goes. So, and that's a scientific approach. I think many different disciplines behave exactly in the same way. Let me touch this point, because I think, as I said at the beginning, we are at a completely different level as the small company Google. Did I pronounce it correctly? Google? Okay. And Mars. They have the pockets. They have all the money in the world, or it seems like that when you're small trying to survive. And they can play this role right now. I can assure you Google in the beginning did not behave like that because they were trying to survive, they were trying to build the infrastructure, to build nice cash flow. And the pressure on them doing the good things is very different than to a small company like ours doing the good things. And it doesn't mean that we don't do them. I mean, people over here, some faculty here in the audience know that we are trying to collaborate. We are trying to share additional development of IP with other people in the field. But the IP that we have created, this is essentially an oxygen line that will potentially remove some competition and will allow us to grow. So when you're small and IP is all you got, you look at that very, very differently, and that's reality. And it doesn't mean what our good intention when we are big later on.
So Eyal brings up the point he was making earlier about the innovation cycle and the capital required to see adoption. And I think this is another topic other panels in the summit are going to pick up in greater context. We've got a great panel with venture capital and things like that, but it's great to perhaps bring it in here because of the perspectives of a startup and a multinational company. So to your point, I spent a part of my career in biotech startups, and in the pharma industry or the pharma sector, they roll about 25% of their profits back in R&D. In ag, it's about an order of magnitude less. And so my observation, although we've seen the crossover fertilization technologies, is that it's harder for ag because of the margins in the products to adopt technology early and invest in the traditional way we've seen at least biotech do it, not necessarily endorsing that that's the only way to do it. But it does appear that there are challenges, as you've pointed out, that are unique to the ag sector and the ag economics that are at play in the innovation cycle. And I know Mars started a venture capital company when they were at the first AgInnovation Summit here 2 years ago. Mars Ventures came, now it's called Digitalis, but they started a venture arm to try to, I think, isolate this kind of activity. But I'm kind of curious what your perspectives on that are, Eyal, because you're pointing out that the capital required for taking a startup technology like yours to the market is significant. And yet the ag sector struggles with where can it adopt it with regard to its maturity, robustness. But most of all, it seems as though it's the economics that are challenging from the ag sector because they can't recover the cost of investing in that technology over its development life cycle. You want to comment more about that, and then we'll go down the line and hear the other perspectives.
Yeah. Thanks for this point, because I think, although I said I'm not looking at the bird eye view, we're in the trenches. We spend a huge amount of time thinking from the 30,000 feet above there, what do we need to do in order to penetrate this industry? For us, every small hill looks like this humongous mountain, and we need to understand how to go there. So there is a lot of things that we need to learn how to take what we have, at the cost that we already spend, and translate that. There's a lot of examples, and we had this discussion before, comparing that to other industries. So the basis of our cell phone was developed by essentially NASA and NSF money, developing those tiny detectors that people used on telescopes in the 60s and 70s. And then we had a revolution. So every one of us has a smartphone that has more power in it than the Apollo space station. And why did that happen? Was that because the basic research was developed by the government? So the answer is yes. There was a lot of that happening there. Today there is a lot less resources for development of basic research. I spent my graduate school developing devices paid by NASA. NASA will never pay for those development anymore. So what's happening today when the industry, communication industry, other kind of industry in electronics want to do something right now, they take the technology that it's already in the public domain, relatively in the public domain, funded by federal sources, and then they put their own money to get it to the next level. So now you're asking, how is ag that working on a very small margin can do that? I think the economics here is slightly different. Our technology, for example, can be applied to food pathogens in food safety. So when you look at the number, and we did a lot of searching for those numbers, they're not very consistent, but at least one number that we heard over and over again, and we pretty much believe right now, is that in the US alone, every single year, there is $21 billion lost due to recalls based on food pathogens. $21 billion. Now, when you add to that the indirect cost, and the indirect cost is loss of equity, lower productivity, and many, many other aspects, the number is more than $80 billion. Those are astronomical numbers. Those are more than many fields in healthcare combined. So the question is, what a big company that can afford maybe investing in new solution should look in terms of the calculation. It costs us potentially $20 million in food loss every single year for good recall, I mean justified recall and unjustified recalls. If we invest 10% of that into looking into the new technology, maybe that's a good investment. It's not what's going to be the cost to do those additional tests that should really concern those companies, in my view. It's like insurance company. We all have insurance, so we pay when we are stuck, we can get some money back. And I think that's how people, especially in the ag, the big firms, not the small one, they cannot afford doing that right now, but the big ones should start thinking. And I hope that they're going to follow the communication, space technology. By the way, NASA is not making the biggest revolution and advances right now. It's SpaceX and all of the other Bezos company. They make a lot of innovation right now, so much faster. And every once in a while, the missiles just explode without going into the sky. But that's okay. There is cost in doing any innovation.
Well, we have a big company on the stage, so maybe we can ask Howard how Mars views this in the context of capital investments and innovation and maybe bringing out the Mars venture story.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is that collectively, the funding world, whether it's foundations or governments or private individual venture cap, has forgot the notion of impact acceleration. So we don't think about impact acceleration. And I know there's a group of people on the West Coast being formed around Silicon Valley that wants to be able to have impact. So things like Yao's company would fit into a category like that, where they see this as impact. And to give you an idea, we have a person who's in charge of quality and food safety. I don't think this person ever sleeps, because they worry 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that something's going to happen that might harm a human being or harm a companion animal. And so the amount of effort that goes into quality and food safety in a company like Mars or our competitors is beyond your imagination, really. And we built the largest quality and food safety center in the world in China because that's where the biggest problem is. And it's now approved by the Chinese government, and we're training people. But this whole notion of quality and food safety is so heroic. I can't possibly encourage you to believe how big it is unless you're in the industry. It is the major consideration every day. Add in fisheries, add in dairy, add in animal byproducts, add in animal meat production, add in all of that, and sensor technology is the only way to do it, because the way it was done in the past, you kind of observed something, then you induced a theory by it's clean or it's not. That won't work anymore. It's got to be handheld devices that you can walk around and really make these decisions. So Mars formed a company called Digitalis. It's interesting, Digitalis is a poison plant, but so much for the people who make calls on names of companies. And one of the things is that they're trying to be impact accelerators. We don't want to own it. We want to help accelerate something to go from discovery to translation to scale. So everyone in this room who is in agriculture loves to make discovery. Or if you're in ag technology, or if you're in any kind of technology, we all love discovery. We all hate translation because it's proof of proposition and it takes a long time. And then comes this notion of scaling, which Eyal is talking about. How do you get it out to scale? So in a company like our size, if we find a company that we believe we should invest in because they have the right mentality, they have the right discoveries, and it can scale to help us, then we're very interested in that. And as you can imagine, since we're both interested in humans and animals, that the breadth of our consideration is quite large.
Dana, I imagine in your company's history, you were essentially, as we said before, innovating around a system that existed but needed to be innovated around to make it more digital. How did you encounter your challenges in raising capital around your innovations?
Like Alan said, TraceGains has been around for about 9 years. Its predecessor company was much more in the animal agricultural world. It was a company called AgInnovation, and they were doing, traceability using ear tags on cattle. And they identified a need in food manufacturing that they thought they could solve with our supplier compliance product. And so they reinvented the company to solve a different problem. And so I think maybe that's one of the messages today is that, always be innovating. And the old solution isn't always the main solution you should be focusing on today. So I also think it's important to understand the difference between innovation and technology versus in agriculture. They're very different paths to success. In the tech world, we focus on MVPs, and I'm not talking about sports, I'm talking about minimally viable products. And in the ag world, you guys are out there doing years and years of field trials, and it has to work before you can release it into the wild. And that's not the world that we live in the tech world. So it's not innovation is not a one-size-fits-all problem or solution. And I think we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, great. We're going to take some questions from the audience, so be thinking about your questions. I've got a few here to get us started, but if you have a question you'd like to ask, we'll be happy to take it in the time we have left. So I'm going to start out with a question that came to us about regulation. And, we're sort of in an interesting time in this country around regulation. And I think it has real impacts for ag. And I wondered, we've got sort of great thinkers in different sectors here or different vectors around bioinfo and physical. So what is the impact of potentially reduced agricultural regulation on trade? And I think there's an interest in looking at that from an international perspective. I don't know, maybe Dana, you'd like to start in terms of, I know you mentioned the Food Safety Modernization Act. I think that's clearly one of the U.S. regulatory movements that we've seen, and there was just a more recent announcement about FSMA. So why don't you talk a little bit about regulation?
Sure. I've worked in the regulatory world, but before the Food Safety Modernization Act was the most important thing to me. I worked for USDA, and I helped open up new markets for U.S. agriculture. I was at the embassy in Moscow for 3 years, and I know a few things about non-scientific trade barriers. So, to touch on what you mentioned about global trade, I think certainly technology can help us get on the same page with our trading partners and share information and build. A lot of what USDA does overseas is not just ensure that we maintain markets that are mature markets like China, but they go out and they spend a lot of time doing capacity building, teaching, basic concepts, extension type projects. So when it comes to the, regulatory environment around trade right now, I think ultimately the business has to win out in that argument of free versus fair trade. I have to believe in a system where our number one and our number two trading partners that are next door neighbors, I have to believe that the business world isn't going to let short-sighted concerns about trade deficit, and the business world understands what are the drivers and influencers of trade deficits. So I think this might be a case where we have to just set aside the political discussion and focus on the economic drivers here. And I maintain hope that 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 sanity and economics will win the day on that issue. When it comes to regulatory, either whether we're talking about GMO labeling or Food Safety Modernization Act, I think we're seeing increasing amounts of regulation, and of course, it's been pretty good for our business, to be honest with you. Helping companies understand how to meet their regulatory compliance commitments is kind of what we do. And then when it comes to GMO labeling, which I think USDA is trying to figure out how to implement those rules, I think that information sharing and getting on the same page is really important. I think, and technology, not just knowing what the rules are, but how do we get systems? So we're partnering with a food labeling software company to help take the data out of our system and put it into food labeling systems, so that when we have new changes, whether it's nutritional labeling, GMO labeling, that industry can react more quickly. We had this delay this year in the food regulatory, the food labeling deadline. It was supposed to be this year, and now we don't know. A lot of our customers spent millions and millions and millions of dollars getting ready for this year's deadline. And it's kind of an early adopter tax to pay that money, and then maybe have the rules change sometime over the next year, and the goalpost gets moved. So I think the more that we can make those changes more efficient for industry, make it easier to pull data out of one system and put it into another, I think that's what technology and that's what innovation can do for industry.
And Howard, you're sourcing cacao mostly from Cote d'Ivoire right now, so and I imagine have product lines that pull from all over the world. What are you seeing in terms of regulation that might be in fact impacting Mars businesses?
Well, Cote d'Ivoire is the world's largest producer of cacao. Ghana's number 2, Indonesia's number 3, Ecuador is probably number 4. So we buy from around the world. We don't necessarily buy direct. We buy through brokers, the Cargills and the Dreyfuses and the Barry Callebaut's, Olam Ecoms, what have you. In our particular case, if I look at Cote d'Ivoire, in 1960, the forest cover was worth $150 billion. In 2015, when the FAO stat was published, there was 94% of the forest cover was gone, and the entire value of cacao sold to that point from 1960 to 2015 was $100 billion. So they lost $50 billion worth of value. So one would say that the issue that we face now is inequality in supply chains. How do we pay for carbon in the trees? How do we pay for carbon in the soil? How do we increase the yield to the smallholder? And if Ed Phelps, who won a Nobel Prize for his theory of supply chains, is right, early adapters will win and late adapters will lose. And it's just an unfortunate truth, especially in the third world. So you have to work on genetics, you have to work on the supply chain, you have to work on all these things. And regulatory, I think we actually have a higher level of sense of what that should be than maybe even some of the countries. I'm not talking about Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana, but other places where devastation is caused by supply chains, whether it's oil palm or soybeans. There's been a general disregard. And if we consider ourselves to be a literate culture and we have environmental, conservation, ecological, social, cultural, and economic issues at our heart, then all those things have to be in play with that. And I think corporations like Mars do exist in that world and are thinking differently than they may have thought 20 years ago.
Yeah, I'll imagine the regulatory world, in your case, oftentimes compliance is set by what sensors can measure, right? If we set the lowest limit of acceptability on the limit of detection of our sensor technology. I wonder if you could comment on that in the context of regulation and how it is impacted by sensor development, but in the same context of this sort of regulatory environment we're in.
Yeah, that's a very good question that we deal with all the time. As a matter of fact, sometimes when I go to conferences and I hear all kind of scientific theoretical talk, and I know in the lab we cannot recreate that, and some of the rules and regulation requires a certain detection level of a pathogen, something that there is no technology demonstrated capability as of now. So how do you really do that? So the problem is how do we even come with a regulatory criteria? Are we involving the people that understand technology? But it's not only technology, because if I can make one measurement in a laboratory and I can get to a certain type of sensitivity, can I do that in reproducible way in the middle of a rural area where I have to do that 10 times an hour and it's in a very dirty environment? So converting regulatory to reality in the field is another aspect that I think most of the people that sometimes involved in those regulatory are not very aware of. We talk in our company with many people, leaders of food manufacturers, especially in the Boulder area. Boulder is becoming kind of the organic center of the USA. All of the bars, the health bars, the healthy drinks, they're all trying to have a Boulder address. And the big ones, the one that you probably heard in the news all the time, they aware of FSMA. They know that they are maybe 80% within the rules that FSMA is set up, maybe 90%, but most of them will tell you we're not there yet. The small manufacturer, the small producer will tell you, we cannot even worry about that. We don't have the resources. As a matter of fact, if we stay in business in the next 2 years, then we'll worry about that. So there is a very disconnect between regulatory, that it's for the big company, the one that do have the pockets to create those mechanisms, even if they have the science and the technology to check that on a regular basis, to the one, and those small ones are becoming much bigger aspect of the economy, the small producer of health food and bars and the rest of them. So what do we do for all of those different companies? I think it's not well understood, at least not by all the discussion we had with the companies.
Great. The next question came in, and I'll pose it to all three of our panelists. And I think it's a great opportunity to sort of hear how these three sort of areas, info, bio, and physical, are thinking about what ultimately drives much of our motivation and intent in the ag sector. That's producing more food and more nutritious food. I think that's one of the themes that we certainly are interested in. And so the question really comes from the audience is, what kind of untapped resources exist that will allow us to do that without putting a strain on existing resources? And I think what comes to mind, and an opportunity to chat about, and even Secretary Vilsack mentioned, that we really can't talk about food and ag without talking about water or energy. That these, and I think especially sitting inside of a land-grant university, you get a sense of sort of the resource utilization, optimization, and management that is required to achieve those goals. So I'd love to hear your perspectives on what ultimately drives us is really to feed the future, right? And to feed it in a nutritious way. And how can we do that from your perspectives without putting more strain on the system? I think that's the question. And it'd be great to sort of consider that food, energy, water interplay. Who wants to start?
What is certainly clear is that the large seed companies, biotech companies, up to now have not made water use efficiency and nutrient use efficiency their goal. Neither have they figured out how to make nitrogen-fixing maize or wheat or rice. These are the holy grails. But there hasn't been any incentive to work on nutrient use or water use efficiency in the way that there should be, especially in a place like California, where we know we're going to have another series of droughts and water is critical, but even in Colorado, the same thing happens. So when there's no incentive, because the largest companies that control those areas of discourse won't do anything, then the only hope is that the government will step in. NIFA should really focus on nutrient use efficiency and water use efficiency. And what it really means as you talk about a trickle-down system is when it gets to the third world, where they suffer the most from lack of good germplasm, lack of nutrient-enriched vegetable plant material, highly folated, high vitamin A, zinc, whatever you need to develop a completely and healthy pregnancy, you realize that it's just not happening. And recently I had a guest editorial in Handelsblatt, which is the German equivalent of the Wall Street Journal. It's a business magazine. And the whole topic was United Against Hunger. And that's one thing I don't think we are yet. Secretary Vilsack made a very interesting plea about that. But most people are not thinking about what's going on in the third world and the fact that we have stunting at the levels or aflatoxin at the levels that we have them because it seems so far away. In the luxuriant environment we live in, those things become very difficult to focus on.
Any other comments? Yeah?
Yeah, but I think most of those things, when they come too close to home, everybody all of a sudden wakes up. So when we hear on the news that there is Ebola in Africa, okay, well, we cry for a second, but all of a sudden people start going on airplanes, arriving at DIA, then we worry about that. I think many of the issues you're talking about would be translated to economical incentives because the problem will come here so quickly and we cannot start working on them when we have a Cat 5 hurricane right now. Nothing you do in Florida is going to make any difference right now. We should have done that 10 years ago. Maybe now we had a solution. So this is like the building storm, and as soon as we're going to have the front wave of that, people will start waking up, and maybe the money will follow.
One thing to that point, we were talking about populations. Africa, the continent of Africa will be the most populous continent in 2050. So either we fix the problems there, or more mass migration, or mass hunger, mass chronic malnutrition. So there is a role for land grant institutions and private companies and young startups to actually put some focus into it, but it does cost money, and it takes away a little bit from the dairy industry here to work on the dairy industry there. So there needs to be a system by where an academic institution can allot some of its resources, not just to train the people from these countries, but to actually send the technologies there and make them adaptable in those places. And that's missing largely at almost every land grant university.
I think we have another question from the audience.
We've got a good stack of them, so I encourage you, if you ask some questions, go ahead and try and grab one of the panel members to ask those specific questions you had. But one good one that I think there's a lot of expertise on is, other than finished goods traceability, what else can or should blockchain technology be used for?
The stumper.
Blockchain is going to be everywhere in every aspect of our lives, at a multiplier faster than a cell phone was. And you know, when blockchain really began, it was all about Bitcoin and the dark side of the economy. And now it's becoming part of the populist side of the economy, and it's highly trusted if you really understand it and look at how it actually works and how it's all verified and the history that goes with it. So I think it'll happen quickly. I think places like Africa will adopt blockchain for micro loans, for one way to get money out to a rural sector where you might not otherwise be able to get it. So I'm very enthused by blockchain. I wish I'd have bought Bitcoin stock when it was beginning as opposed to now.
I would say, if you're not familiar with blockchain technology, follow Frank Annis, the food safety guru at Walmart. He posts almost every day some interesting article about the use of blockchain, how they're using it. And we've had blockchain patents at our company from our predecessor company. But I think, people like Frank who understand industry, who understand the food supply chain, can see 20 years down the line that the rest of us are still kind of scratching our head trying to figure out what this technology is. I would encourage you to follow Frank.
Great. Another question?
All right, I'll keep going loud. Probably time for just one more, but I think this one was pretty interesting. What steps are being taken to compensate base level producers for their additional inputs that they have to stay compliant for food processors?
Your simple answer, none. I mean, really, it doesn't work that way. That's what the inequality of supply chains is all about. Scale has a lot to do with the ability to live within the rules and regulations. And smallholders, unless they're part of cooperatives which conglomerate the goods, have a much more difficult time to succeed in that world.
When I worked for the soybean industry, we had a way of saying farmers are very economic creatures. If you want them to grow more identity preserved or more organic, just add some incentive, make a premium for that. There's no premium for food safety, unfortunately.
Great. Well, I want to thank my panelists. It's been a great conversation. I encourage you to interact with them over the course of the summit, and appreciate your attention and questions from the audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph and panelists. You guys can exit to the right, and we have gifts for all of you. Lunch is now available in the adjacent ballroom. Please make a point of visiting with Karina, our graphic recorder, to let her know where you fit within the Colorado Ag Innovation ecosystem. Please return by 12:30 for the next keynote address from Juan Luciano, CEO of Archer Daniels Midland Company. Thanks for a great morning and have a great lunch.